Yes, we
Okay,
can hear you
thank
now.
you.
Thank you.
Fourthly, the Asia-Pacific LDCs as a group missed the IPOA target to double the share of exports as their combined share in world goods and service exports. A bold proposal to promote export diversification in LDCs with a firm commitment to duty-free, quota-free market access, structural transformation, removal of non-tariff barrier to OECD markets are the needs of the hour. Finally, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, we need a paradigm shift in our approach and policies of LDC's graduation. Although graduation testifies to a certain level of socio-economic development, it can never be considered as a development panacea. The graduated countries are not going to be overnight free of the challenges and vulnerabilities. Therefore, abrupt loss of LDC-specific support may cause a major shock for many of the graduated countries. It will be critical to ensure a smooth transition period through continued international support to make their graduation sustainable and irreversible. Our meeting today and throughout this week offers an excellent opportunity to deliberate on a package of support beyond existing smooth transition measures for the graduated countries. We look forward to agreeing on a new generation of development paradigm in LDC 5 that will stimulate growth, promote sustainable development, and build resilience against economic, environmental, and health-related shocks in our region and beyond. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I would rest it here, and now it's my great honor to invite His Excellency Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen MP, Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, for his welcome remarks. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador thank you, Ambassador Rabah Fatima. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam Chairperson, Honorable Presidents of the General Assembly and the ECOSOC, Distinguished Under Secretary General of OHRLS, Honorable Ministers, friends from the UN system, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. At the very outset, I would like to welcome you all to the Asia-Pacific Regional Review Meeting, jointly organized by the Government of Bangladesh, UN OHRLS, and the UN ESCAP. We are keen to welcome you all in Dhaka. Unfortunately, the crippling situations caused by COVID-19 did not allow us to do so. Let me commend at the outset Under Secretary General and High Representative Ambassador Cartenary Ratri and his team for making the organizational preparations for this meeting, which no doubt is a complex task at the current situation. I also thank my colleagues in New York, Geneva, and Dhaka for their support in organizing this meeting. The main focus of this session is to examine how the Asia-Pacific LDCs have done in the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action, what kind of challenges they have faced, and what kind of policies and support they need to accelerate their development in their journey towards graduation. It is highly encouraging that the Asia-Pacific LDCs have registered considerable progress in their socio-economic development. This has been manifested in the majority of LDCs of this region. We all should rejoice that 10 out of 11 LDCs of this region have already met the criteria for graduation at least once. Let me now tell you that the Bangladesh story of graduation, under the dynamic, bold, and visionary leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh has marched towards sustainable development. Our country has set a precedent as we have qualified for graduation by fulfilling all three criteria in 2 subsequent terms for the first time in the history of graduation. Our per capita income reached $2,227, and poverty has come down to 20.5%. Bangladesh is now the 41st largest and among the top 5 fastest growing economies in the world. Propelled by a robust manufacturing sector and significant investment in infrastructure to various mega projects, Bangladesh has set a target of becoming a developed nation by 2041. Boost in exports, achievement in agriculture, increased remittance flows received from our expatriate community abroad, coupled with the vision and commitment of the country's leadership and targeted approach are major drivers for Bangladesh's recent development. Social changes, starting with the economic empowerment of women, has also contributed to Bangladesh's economic transformation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite considerable progress achieved by some LDCs, challenges that Asia-Pacific LDCs are facing are still paramount. Although economic growth was high in the region, it did not translate into structural transformation in all countries. Access to technology and funds remain a barrier. While mobile cellular subscription in the region surged remarkably from 38% to 90%, internet penetration rate was only 47% in 2019. Healthcare and social protection systems continue to remain a challenge for our countries. Lack of technological capability and digital connectivity has constrained many households to access ICT and remote learning in the LDCs. Personal remittance sent to the Asia-Pacific LDCs have steadily grown from $18 billion in 2011 to $32 billion in 2018. However, the average cost of sending remittances to these countries remain exorbitantly high, ranging from 4.4% to nearly 17% of the amount transferred. This is much higher than the Addis Ababa Action Agenda target of reducing such transaction costs to 3% by 2030. We are also concerned that our countries, as a group, missed the Istanbul Programme of Action target to double the share of exports, as their combined share increased from 0.23% in 2011 to only 0.38% in 2019. While our countries were struggling to overcome various ongoing structural challenges, the COVID-19 pandemic emerged as a major threat for our countries and further jeopardized the limited progress towards achieving the SDGs. We cannot conceive the consequence of the pandemic to this fullest extent yet, as the new and deadly variants, especially the Delta variant, continues to ravage our countries. The protracted economic recession triggered by the pandemic will result in massive economic downturns and societal disruptions, all threatening hard-won gains and stability. We are seriously concerned that the Asia-Pacific LDCs suffer disproportionately high human and economic losses owing to climate change and disasters. The recently released IPCC report is indeed another wake-up call. It warns that carbon dioxide concentration has been the highest in at least 2 million years. Current trajectory of the global warming and melting of the glaciers will cause significant rise in the sea level, which will submerge many countries entirely and the huge territory of the island countries and low-lying coastal countries. Millions of people will be displaced and become climate migrants. As Bangladesh itself lies on one of the mega deltas, this is a life and death question for us. Potential threats that the millions of people is likely to face should be placed at the center stage as we debate the broader agenda of the graduation and smooth transition. Already millions of Bangladeshis are being uprooted from their homes because of global warming and river erosion, and government is diverting its resources for their rehabilitation. It should be the world community to come forward to help rehabilitate them. At this critical time of high alert, we need stronger policies and support measures at all levels. Let me make 6 proposals for consideration of the global community. First, we need to aim at halting the spread of the pandemic and eventually eliminating it. Measures should also target rapid recovery from the massive impacts of COVID-19. Reinforcing the public health infrastructure's ecosystem is needed more than ever. We need access to safe and reliable vaccine to inoculate all our people at no cost now. Second, international community must undertake bold and decisive actions to stop the global temperature. Mobilization of the annually $100 billion climate fund with 50-50 balance between adaptation and mitigation is the most urgent call of our time. LDCs also need urgent access to green technologies. Special funds should be allocated for the rehabilitation of climate migrants or people who are uprooted from their homes and houses and traditional jobs due to river erosion or global warming. Third, we must build digital infrastructure ecosystem for a digital economy and e-commerce, distance learning, health services, and so much more. Fourth, for graduated countries, abrupt withdrawal of LDC-specific special and differential support and loss of flexibility in the implementation of the obligation will seriously jeopardize their course of development. International partners need to provide specific supports for LDCs for smooth graduation. Fifth, trade will continue to remain a key driver of development for graduating and graduated countries. The group of LDCs in the WTO has already placed its proposals for the extension of LDC-specific special and preferential treatments for 12 years after graduation. Furthermore, a provision for a transition period under TRIPS, Article 66.1 for 12 years after graduation is also being pursued. These proposals warrant a favorable consideration by the international community, especially in the current context of the impacts of COVID-19. And finally, we need to revisit the current system of global partnerships in the lead up to the 5th UN Conference on LDCs to agree on a new generation of international support architecture that is built on the spirit of shared prosperity and mutual accountability. I thank you. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu.
I thank you, Honorable Foreign Minister, for your insightful remarks. Thank you, sir. I now have the pleasure to invite Mr. E. Kotne Rattray, Under-Secretary General and High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDS, and Secretary General of the LDC-5 Conference to deliver his remarks. And let me take this opportunity, USG Rattray. This is your first meeting of the Asia-Pacific region, so allow me to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of our group. Over to you, ASG.
Thank you for your kind words, Madam Chairman, Honorable Ministers, colleagues from the UN system, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. I'm grateful to the government of Bangladesh and the UN ESCAP for partnering with my office in organizing this meeting. This meeting is mandated by the General Assembly and by the ECOSOC as part of the preparatory process for the 5th UN Conference on Least Developed Countries. As you may know, it was slated to be held earlier in our schedule, but had to be postponed due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Asia-Pacific Review meeting provides an opportunity for us to consider and assess the status of implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action by the countries of the Asia-Pacific region. As we chart the course for the next 10-year Programme of Action for LDCs, it also provides an opportunity to reflect on what works with the region and what does not, and to draw salient lessons for the future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the LDCs in the Asia-Pacific region were, pre-pandemic, on course to make tangible socio-economic progress. On average, their GDP was growing by more than 6% during the implementation period of the IPOA. They also registered tangible progress in their socio-economic development. And as you have heard, this progress has led 10 out of 11 of the region to reach some point in the graduation pipeline, meeting the thresholds at least on one occasion. This was a remarkable sign of progress in their journey to achieve the SDGs. However, despite such progress made by the majority of the Asia-Pacific LDCs, they continue to face severe challenges due to their inherent structural challenges, as well as new and emerging ones. As you know, 2 LDCs in the region are trapped in conflict and post-conflict situations, causing humanitarian crises and severely impeding progress towards the goals and targets of the IPOA. The most severe recent challenge encountered by the LDCs is obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, which has dimmed their prospects for graduation and for a smooth transition. It has also retarded prospects for realizing the SDGs. LDCs of this region have experienced substantial slowdown in their economic growth, widespread unemployment, sharp contractions in international trade, and significant slowdown in the flow of external resources. In this latter regard, there has been an almost complete halt in the travel and tourism sectors. Education systems have also been severely disrupted. Climate change is another threat that seriously affects these countries. Natural hazards such as floods, droughts, cyclones, and tornadoes are common features of the region, and ongoing sea level rise is a life and death question for many island and low-lying coastal areas. Furthermore, notwithstanding some progress achieved in the socio-economic fields, structural transformation has yet to take place. This is reflective of the common challenges that most LDCs have been facing. LDCs in the region also lack adequate fiscal buffers with which to withstand shocks and crises, which renders them highly vulnerable to external shocks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, building a strong economic base that is dynamic, sustainable, and resilient is the route to ensuring that these countries will be better able to cope with emerging challenges and crises. This would be the central focus of next year's LDC 5 conference. The collective challenge before us is to design a toolkit for LDCs that will accelerate their sustainable recovery and ensure their resilience against future shocks and crises through structural transformation and the strategic application of science, technology, and innovation. These are the productivity drivers that will serve as a spur to the achievement of sustainable economic growth. With this in mind, my office is engaging in a comprehensive preparatory process in the run-up to the LDC 5 conference. Most of the initial work was already undertaken over the past 2.5 years, and the substantive preparations have laid a solid basis for designing the next program of action for LDCs. Based on the inputs that have emerged from various meetings, conferences, and reports, the LDCs group prepared and presented a zero-draft outcome document that centered on 6 key priority areas. The draft, which is currently being negotiated, reflects the priorities that will ensure that LDCs achieve the SDGs and beyond. It proposes a package of support measures for graduated countries to ensure that graduation is both sustainable and irreversible. In addition, the draft calls on development partners to meet their commitments in the respect of ODA, trade, debt relief, investment, and technology transfer, and proposes additional support measures and initiatives. I commend the chair of the LDCs and other members of the group for their tireless efforts in presenting a comprehensive document. Let me also acknowledge the efficient and dynamic stewardship of the co-chairs of the PrepCom, Ambassador Rabab Fatima of Bangladesh and Ambassador Bob Ray of Canada, for effectively leading the negotiations of the outcome of the LDC-5, a process that is still underway. My office has been supporting the process and will continue to do so in the days and months ahead. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with the exception of the meeting of the LDC Future Forum, we will have concluded all the preparatory meetings by the end of this review meeting. However, there are various global processes slated to be held from now up until January 2022, such as UNCTAD 15, COP26, and the UN Food System Summit, that will provide valuable opportunities to build momentum towards LDC-5. Allow me now to provide a brief overview of the involvement of various stakeholders in the preparation for LDC-5. They have been fully involved in the prep process and will remain engaged in the LDC-5 implementation, follow-up, and monitoring. OHR LLS is organizing the first ever LDC Future Forum, which will take place in Helsinki from the 5th to the 7th of October. The forum will bring together the academic community, thought leaders, policymakers, and practitioners to engage in innovative thinking and new solutions on the challenges and make policy recommendations for LDCs for the next decade. The forum is being organized in collaboration with the UN University World Institute for Development Economics Research and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And here, let me thank the government of Finland for so generously supporting this event. So far, out of 1,000 research proposals, we have shortlisted, or selected, I should say, approximately 35 of those, 35 academic papers that broadly capture various facets of the structural challenges and new and emerging issues that LDCs face in pursuing their sustainable development. My office is also working with parliamentarians, civil society organizations, youth, private sector, South-South partners to fully engage them in the conference and its preparatory processes. Several work streams have already been identified for these stakeholder groups leading up to the conference. They will engage in high-level meetings, exhibitions, and thematic discussions on the sidelines of the LDC-5 conference. Key outcomes of these various stakeholder tracks will include declarations as well as announcements of tangible partnerships and initiatives in relation to the implementation of what will be the 10-year Doha Program of Action. My office is working with creative and technology partners around the world to ensure that LDC-5 is a future-facing conference. It will take advantage of the latest technologies to realize the hopes and the aspirations of the least developed countries through digital projections and music, and will connect those on the outside to the proceedings on the inside. We are confident that delegates will leave LDC-5 inspired and motivated with the benefit of new networks to do their part in the awesome task of delivering on the new program of action. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, we are exceedingly grateful to the government of Qatar, the host of the LDC-5 conference, who is wholly capable and fully committed to making LDC-5 a landmark event. My office is holding regular meetings with the representatives of Qatar in its role as host country, and I can assure you that we are on track in relation to our preparations. Let me also express my gratitude to the governments of Canada and Turkey for their generous financial assistance for the preparations. In closing, Excellencies, I encourage all member states to ensure participation in the conference, which will be held, as you know, from the 23rd to the 27th of January next year. at the heads of state, heads of government level. I also encourage high-level participation in the multiple processes leading up to the conference in Doha. Invitation letters from the UN Secretary General and the host country will be transmitted shortly. I encourage member states and other stakeholders to announce new and enhanced partnership initiatives and deliverables for LDCs at the conference, which would support the implementation of the new program of action. I thank you for your attention.
I thank you, USG Rattray, for your statement, and also take this opportunity to once again thank you and your team for the excellent support that you are providing us in preparing us for the LDC 5 conference. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure to invite Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to make her welcome remarks. She will join us virtually.
Madam Chairperson, Honorable
The
Minister.
Executive Secretary has the floor now.
Madam Chairperson, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the high-level Asia-Pacific Regional Review meeting on Istanbul Program of Action, co-organized by the Government of Bangladesh, UNOHRLS, as well as ESCAP. The period 2011-2020 covered by the Istanbul Program of Action was very dynamic for the LDCs in our region. At the outset of the decade, our region was home to 15 LDCs. 10 years later, 12 remain, following graduation from the LDC category by Maldives in 2011, Samoa in 2014, and most recently, Vanuatu in 2020. In addition, Bhutan and the Solomon Islands are also set for graduation in 2023 and 2024, respectively. I would like to congratulate all graduates and prospective graduates on their success. Following the triennial review in February this year of the list of LDCs by the Committee for Development Policy, 10 of the region's remaining 12 LDCs have also met the criteria for graduation. This means that by the end of this decade, and barring any setbacks, almost all LDCs in Asia-Pacific will have graduated, and is clearly a sign of the development success of these countries. Despite these successes, the LDCs in our region have encountered significant challenges. They continue to face vulnerabilities due to a high level of external dependence and a low level of resilience to external shocks. One of the most severe challenges that they have encountered is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has dimmed prospects for ensuring a smooth transition for LDC category and for realizing the SDGs. As a result, and notwithstanding their development achievements, the group of LDCs in Asia and Pacific will continue to require significant support from the international community to supplement their domestic efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as this meeting is a review meeting of the Asia-Pacific region, I would like to shed light on several challenges and opportunities that characterize the LDCs in the region. First, as noted earlier, many LDCs in the region are graduating soon, yet they will have to deal with the effects stemming from the withdrawal of duty-free and quota-free exports and the end of access to certain concessional financing, while also focusing on their socio-economic recovery from COVID-19. Second, Asia-Pacific LDCs are such a diverse group of countries. 8 of the 12 remaining countries are either landlocked or sea-locked, and both the world's largest LDCs and the smallest LDCs are in the region. Some of them are post-conflict countries, while others are going through political transformations. In terms of opportunities, what clearly differentiates Asia-Pacific LDCs from the others is their proximity to large and more developed markets within the region. While many Asia-Pacific LDCs have benefited from sub-regional or regional cooperation framework, with the prominent example being ASEAN, the potential benefits of further intra-regional integration are still significant. South-South cooperation between former and graduating LDCs through, for instance, knowledge sharing and consensus building will be critical complements to the national efforts that LDCs are undertaking in their preparation for graduation. In closing, ESCAP stands ready and to strengthen and coordinate UN-wide efforts to assist LDCs in our region in better understanding the graduation process and developing and implementing a strategy for a smooth transition. I hope this meeting will be useful for the LDCs in our region and their development partners in preparation for the LDC 5 conference. I firmly believe that our voices will form a solid basis for the ongoing development of a new program for action for LDCs for the next decade. Again, I would like to congratulate many LDCs in our region for successfully meeting the graduation criteria from least developed status. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, and for your statement, and also take this opportunity to thank you and your office for the continued support that you provide to our group, and we'll continue to count on that. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we'll now listen to a pre-recorded video statement by His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the General Assembly.
Her Excellency Ms. Rabah Fatima, Permanent Representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations, Chair of the LDC 5 Preparatory Committee, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the Istanbul Program of Action. I'd like to commend Ambassador Fatima, along with Ambassador Bobre, for chairing the LDC 5 Preparatory Committee during this period. Dear colleagues, the Istanbul Program of Action was designed specifically to help remove the structural challenges to sustainable development. Yet, many of these structural challenges have exacerbated the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in LDCs, underscoring gaps in socioeconomic progress. As we continue the process of recovering from the global pandemic and untangling the consequences of COVID-19, it is important to take stock of the challenges and obstacles that have affected least developed countries during this critical period. As I have so often said, during the 75th session, the pandemic has affected all of us, but not all of us the same. Inequality, both within and between countries, has never been so apparent. Whether discussing women's rights, or access to digital technologies, or the rollout of vaccine campaigns, the pandemic has uncovered the fault lines that have left some further behind than others. This must change. While we cannot go back and change what has happened, we can recognize the lessons learned and apply these to our actions going forward. Resilience can and must be built into our recovery efforts, ensuring that countries are strengthened to maintain development gains despite local and global setbacks should be a priority for all of us. This is particularly true for LDCs across the Asia-Pacific region. It is fair to say that the region is no stranger to natural hazards, from typhoons and cyclones to earthquakes or tsunamis. With roughly a quarter of all LDCs located in the region, it is imperative that resilience is built into recovery efforts so as to ensure that future shocks, in whatever form they come, do not constitute yet more setbacks to sustainable development objectives. Dear colleagues, while progress in achieving the Istanbul Program of Action has been mixed, we have an opportunity through our recovery efforts to move the needle on this. If recovery funds are allocated appropriately, and if resources can be freed up and debt alleviated commensurately, then countries may have the space and capacity to ensure progress. As you advance the preparations for the conference, consider incorporation of the unfinished business in the new program of action. Likewise, I recommend that recovery from COVID-19 and the resources, political will, and capacities that have been unlocked are taken into consideration. We simply cannot miss this opportunity, however tragic its origins may be. Dear colleagues, my final recommendations draw heavily upon the 75th session of the General Assembly and the discussions and high-level meetings. It is my firm belief that SDG accelerators, such as access to digital technologies and closing the energy divide, must be pursued if we are to meaningfully make progress in this decade of action on the Sustainable Development Goals. I highly recommend that these efforts, along with those that tackle the threats to sustainable development, such as climate change, are prioritized in the new program of action. I'm encouraged that amongst the priorities of the Istanbul program of action are elements which have been woven throughout the 75th session of the General Assembly and thus reflect the needs of member states and the people they serve. This includes access to essential medicines and healthcare facilities, universal access to vaccines, increased official development assistance, comprehensive debt relief measures, tackling climate change, and scaled-up investment to sustainably recover from the crisis. If we pursue such ambitious plans through our recovery and into the next decade, we will not only recover from the pandemic, but establish systems and societies better able to handle future crises in whatever form they may come. Thank you. I wish you success in the conference as we conclude the regional reviews and preparatory meetings.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for his kind statement. I now invite the President of the ECOSOC, His Excellency Mr. Colin Vixen Kalapile, to deliver a virtual statement. Ambassador, I understand you're joining us virtually. Ambassador Kalapile.
Distinguished Chairperson, Your Excellency Ms. Rabab Fatima, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative for Bangladesh here in New York, Your Excellency Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, MP, Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, Excellency Katni Ratari, USG and High Representative and Secretary General of the LDC-5 Conference, Ms. Amida Salsia Al-Jabana, Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the government of Bangladesh, the United Nations Office of the High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs, and the SEEDs, and the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, UNESCAP, for organizing this Asia-Pacific Regional Review meeting. That also includes Yemen in preparation of the 5th UN Conference on Least Developed Countries, LDC-5, taking place in January 2022 in Doha, Qatar. Chairperson, as we approach the LDC-5 conference, we should bear in mind that this is happening in an environment of uncertainty and multiple global crises. The COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant impact has negatively dominated all spheres of our lives for more than 1 year and a half now. On the other hand, we are also continuing to bear the brunt of the effects of the climate change, which remains a real threat to the survival of our communities, countries, and all regions of the world. As we all know, the least developed countries are among the most vulnerable member states facing the greatest risk of losing a generation of hard-won development gains due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is over and above being already disproportionately affected by the changing climate. We can also all agree that the situation faced by many, if not all LDCs, is already dire, as more than 500 million people do not have access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. Some 785 million people lack basic drinking water. Some other 488 million people lack access to electricity, while some 800 million people do not have access to the internet. Despite all these challenges, we must still approach the LDC 5 conference with a lot of hope, optimism, and high expectations. In particular, we must continue to pin our hopes on the realization of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, wherein all the UN member states and all the stakeholders have pledged to leave no one behind. We are all cognizant, however, that at the moment, too many people in the LDCs are at higher risk of being left behind. And the situation is exacerbated by the fact that we have less than 10 years to change this dire situation. In my view, the true success of the 2030 Agenda hinges heavily on the achievement and concrete progress made by vulnerable groups of states like the LDCs. We should also remain hopeful that since the decade of action for the SDGs implementation coincides with the new program of action for the least developed countries, there is an opportunity to reshape an effective and strengthened response to enable the LDCs to recover lost ground on the SDGs implementation, as well as increase efforts to confront the many areas where progress is needed. Madam Chairperson, in my previous capacity as Vice President of ECOSOC at its 2021 session, I presided together with the President of the General Assembly over a joint thematic event convened by the two principal organs on 18 June 2021 under the theme of diversifying the financing toolbox to enhance investment in least developed countries. The event highlighted a number of key factors that require our urgent attention. Among them, first, the need for a comprehensive financing mechanism for the LDCs to better manage risk and provide support in times of crisis. And also second, a call for a reformed and strengthened international financial system that can provide more effective and targeted support for the LDCs. With the forthcoming LDC 5 conference, we also have an opportunity as member states and the UN system to evaluate and strengthen the support provided to those countries in the process of graduation, not to lose track. Furthermore, it is imperative that we ensure that the LDC's member states that are in good prospect to graduate in the course of the next decade or have recently graduated, but in transition whilst at the same time recovering from COVID-19, do not return to pre-crisis development patterns. To prevent that, we must do our utmost to assist these countries with evidence-based policy guidance so that they can reframe their development trajectory towards equality, resilience, and environmental sustainability. I believe that a smooth transition will necessitate an extended preparatory period, careful monitoring and analysis of the impacts of the pandemic, and specific transition support to ensure that graduation is indeed permanent and irreversible. In that regard, ECOSOC in June of 2021 endorsed a recommendation by the UN Committee for Development Policy for an extended 5-year preparatory period for the 3 LDCs recommended for graduation at its 2021 triennial review. Our wish as ECOSOC is for an incentive-based and time-bound, improved and integrated support dedicated for graduating and recently graduated LDCs to form a critical part of the new program of action, so as to effectively prepare for sustainable graduation and transition towards long-term sustainable development. Furthermore, helping these countries to access concessional ODA, innovative financing, de-risking financing, and investments for trade, climate action, and disaster risk reduction, access to markets, and flexible implementation of intellectual property protection regimes are all key measures to avoid the risks associated with the LDC's graduation, and should therefore also form a critical part of the new program of action. To conclude, let me reaffirm that as President of ECOSOC, my team and I, with the support of our Secretariat, stand ready to offer our full support for the agenda of the LDCs, especially at these very challenging times. We will be working hand in hand with you as we traverse the path towards Doha LDC 5. This week's meeting is indeed another key milestone on this road, and for the LDCs to build consensus on how to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 agenda in those countries during the decade of action, and to ensure that no one will be left behind. It is therefore vital that the LDC 5 conference delivers concrete solutions for the challenges faced by this group of member states, given their vulnerabilities. Let me also join others in taking this moment to express our profound appreciation for the invaluable support of the government of Qatar as the host country of LDC 5. Please, as ECOSOC President, consider me and my office your trusted partner in our common objectives of effective LDC 5 conference preparations and its ultimate success. I thank you for your kind attention and wish you all the best for the remainder of this important meeting. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I thank you, Mr. President, for your comprehensive and insightful remarks. And thank you once again for joining us this morning from New York. And it is really reassuring to hear from you the assurance of ECOSOC support to the LDC and to the LDC 5 conference. Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, I now invite His Excellency Mr. Ali Khalfan Al Mansouri, Permanent Representative of the State of Qatar to the UN in Geneva, to deliver a statement on behalf of His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, Foreign Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister of Qatar. I believe, Ambassador, you'll be speaking in Arabic, but your English version of the statement has been circulated, and we apologize we do not have interpretation for this morning's session. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Excellency, and my apologies about the translation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سيدتي الرئيسة، سعادة وزير خارجية بنغلاديش، سيد وكيل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة والممثل السامي لأقل البلدان نمواً والبلدان النامية غير الساحلية والدول الجزرية الصغيرة النامية، السيدة وكيلة الأمين العام للجنة الاقتصادية والاجتماعية لآسيا والمحيط الهادي، السيدات والسادة المقرون، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن من دواعي سرورنا أن نشارك في هذا الاجتماع الهام الذي ينعقد في إطار التحضير لمؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً، الذي ستتشرف باستضافته في الدوحة في شهر يناير 2022، متمنياً ويشرفني بأن أنقل لكم تمنيات سعادة الشيخ محمد بن عبد الرحمن آل ثاني نائب رئيس مجلس الوزراء وزير الخارجية بأن تتكلل أعمال هذا الاجتماع بالنجاح، ونتقدم بالشكر لجميع المشاركين في تنظيمه. يسرنا اليوم أن نفتتح أعمال هذا الاجتماع للمضي قدما خلال الأيام القادمة في عملية تقييم شاملة لتنفيذ خطة عمل إسطنبول لصالح أقل البلدان نمواً من قبل دول منطقة آسيا والمحيط الهادي وشركائه في التنمية. ونحن نتطلع إلى مخرجات هذا الاجتماع التي من شأنها أن تثري مناقشات المؤتمر الخامس لأقل البلدان نمواً من حيث تبادل أفضل الممارسات والدروس المستفادة وتحديات العقبات والقيود، فضلاً عن الخروج بنتائج بشأن الإجراءات والمبادرات اللازمة للتغلب عليها وتحديات السياسات الدولية والمحلية الفاعلة، وكذلك التحديات والفرص الناشئة ووسائل مواجهتها. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة الموقرون، تأتي استضافة دولة قطر للمؤتمر الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً ضمن حرصها على دعم أقل البلدان نمواً في جهودها لمواجهة التحديات والمعوقات التي تواجه تحقيق التنمية المستدامة. ونحن على ثقة بأن هذا المؤتمر سيساهم في تلبية احتياجات ودعم مسيرتها نحو تحقيق التنمية للسنوات العشرة القادمة، وبما يتماشى مع خطة التنمية المستدامة لعام 2030. وأننا نتطلع لأن يبني مؤتمر الدوحة القادم على الخبرات المكتسبة والنجاحات التي تحققت في المؤتمرات السابقة، وآخرها مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الرابع المعني بأقل البلدان نمواً التي استضافته جمهورية تركيا الشقيقة، التي اطلعت بدور هام في تحقيق خطوات هامة تم تنفيذها عبر برنامج عمل إسطنبول لصالح أقل البلدان نمواً للعقد 2020-2011، والتي لابد لنا من الاستفادة منها والبناء عليها خلال العقد القادم. ومما لا شك فيه بأن أقل البلدان نمواً في منطقة آسيا والمحيط الهادي قد حققت تقدماً كبيراً في تنميتها الاجتماعية والاقتصادية خلال العقد المنصرم، ولا سيما في الحد من الفقر، في التدخل والاستثمارات في الموارد البشرية والبنية التحتية، مما مكن بعض من البلدان في هذه المنطقة من الوفاء بمعايير التخرج. ونخص بالذكر الإنجازات الأخيرة التي تحققت في شهر ديسمبر 2020 بتخرج فانوتو من قائمة أقل الدول نمواً. وأننا ندرك بأن على الرغم من هذا التقدم لا تزال هناك حاجة ماسة لتلبية الاحتياجات التي لا تزال قائمة والأولويات الخاصة لأقل البلدان نمواً في المنطقة، واستنياداً لسياسة قطر المعروفة بالتعاون والشراكة مع المجتمع الدولي، وانطلاقاً من إيمانها الراسخ بأهمية هذا التعاون، خاصة في ظل التحديات الراهنة التي شهدتها العالم. لم تدخر بلادي أي جهد من أجل تقديم الدعم بكافة أشكاله لأقل البلدان نمواً، وخاصة في منطقة آسيا والمحيط الهادي التي تجمعنا معها علاقات متينة في إطار التعاون والشراكة الدولية. وود أن أشير في هذا السياق بشكل خاص إلى إعلان حضرة صاحب السمو أمير بلاد دولة قطر حفظه الله خلال مؤتمر القمة للعمل المناخي التي انعقدت في شهر سبتمبر 2019 عن مساهمة دولة قطر بمبلغ 100 مليون دولار أمريكي لدعم البلدان الأقل نمواً والدول الجزرية الصغيرة النامية للتعامل مع تغير المناخ، التي ستساهم في دعم مساعي بلدان منطقة آسيا والمحيط الهادي للتغلب على التحديات التي تواجهها نتيجة لهذه الظاهرة. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة الموقرون، أننا على وعي تام بأن انعقاد المؤتمر الخامس لأقل البلدان نمواً يأتي في مرحلة هامة جداً، وعليه فإننا نتطلع لأن يبني برنامج عمل الدوحة للعقد المقبل على الإنجازات التي تم تحقيقها في برنامج عمل إسطنبول، وأن يستكمل تحقيقات الأهداف التي ما زالت في طور الإنجازات، وأن يكون نقطة انطلاقة وخارطة طريق بصفته أول برنامج عمل سيتصدى ويعطي أولوية لمعالجة تداعيات وباء فيروس كورونا على أقل البلدان نمواً. ولا يفوتنا هنا أن نتقدم بالشكر لمجموعة أقل البلدان نمواً على تقديمها مسودة أولية شاملة لبرنامج عمل الدوحة، ونحن نتطلع على اختتام المفاوضات بشأن الوثيقة في أقرب وقت ممكن ضمن التحضيرات لتنظيم المؤتمر. كما نعرب عن شكرنا لكافة الجهات التي تتعاون مع دولة قطر في عملية التحضير للمؤتمر. ويسرني إبلاغكم بأن على الرغم من التحديات والعراقيل التي تسببت بها الأزمة الصحية العالمية، فإن عملية التحضير للمؤتمر في الدوحة تجري بسلاسة وفقا لخطة زمنية ولوجستية محكمة لضمان نجاح المؤتمر وسلامته وأمن المشاركين فيه. ختاما، نتطلع إلى مشاركة فعالة في اجتماعات الاستعراض الإقليمي الخاص بمنطقة آسيا والمحيط الهادي حول تنفيذ برنامج عمل اسطنبول لصالح أقل البلدان نموا، بما يفضي لمخرجات هامة تساهم في إنجاح المؤتمر الخامس لأقل البلدان نموا، بحيث يرقى لتطلعات هذه الدول لتحقيق النمو والازدهار. وشكرا سيدتي الرئيسة.
I thank you, Excellency, for your statement, and I wish to also take this opportunity to thank, through you, the government of Qatar for the invaluable support that you're providing in preparing for the LDC5 conference, and we are all looking forward to Doha 2022. Thank you. Excellencies, I have the pleasure now to invite His Excellency Mr. Eisenhower Makaka, Foreign Minister of Malawi and Chair of the Global Coordination Bureau of LDCs. Honorable Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Your Excellency, Dr. Abdul Momen, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh and host of this regional review meeting. Your Excellency, Mr. Mevlut Cavusoglu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey. Your Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qatar. President of the General Assembly, President of ECSOC, Your Excellency Mr. Kotne Ratri, Under Secretary General and High Representative of LDCs, LLDCs, and SIDs. Your Excellency Ms. Amida Sasha Sajabana, Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the ESCAP. Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good morning. I would like to begin by thanking Bangladesh, UN OHRLLS, and UN ESCAP for co-hosting this meeting and for extending an invitation to me to be part of this important component of the LDC5 process. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Victor Mola Utoikamanu for her work in steering us thus far in the LDC5 process, and to congratulate Mr. Ratri on his appointment to the role of the USG and High Representative of LDCs and LLDCs and SIDs. I look forward, on behalf of my delegation, to working closely with you, and please be assured of our support. Excellencies and colleagues, the Istanbul Program of Action mandate, as we are all aware, came to an end in 2020. Reports on this from the UN and other sources across the economic, social, and environmental spectrum indicate that the pre-COVID-19 LDCs had made mixed progress. This volatility in performance, according to recent reports, has been further worsened by COVID-19, posing a risk to sustainable development trajectory of the LDCs. As we close the chapter on the IPOA, it also provides a great opportunity for us to take stock of what worked and what did not, and draw lessons towards Doha. Many outstanding issues remain relevant, and others requiring contextualizing in line with recent and current global development. Excellencies and colleagues, while we took a little longer to get to this regional review, it is no less important. General Assembly Resolution 73/242 emphasized the bottom-up nature of the LDC-5 process from national, regional, to global inputs. As such, this meeting is an important input towards the LDC-5 process in ensuring inclusivity and engagement of the entire group. Excellencies and colleagues, among the key issues of discussion this week include climate change, graduation, trade, and structural transformation. Climate change, as we are all aware, is one of the biggest existential threats of our lifetime. The recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Experts report titled, I quote, Climate Change 2021, the Physical Science Basis, unquote, informs that the intensity of climate change is more rapid and widespread. Furthermore, that as planet Earth inhabitants, we are not acting fast enough to address these changes. It states, and I quote again, unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to close to 1.5% or even 2% will be beyond reach, unquote. This indicates that environmental and climate disasters will rather increase in frequency and intensity, as exemplified by the dual tragedy of earthquake and Hurricane Matthew experienced by our sister country, Haiti. As we head to COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, this November, we have a unique opportunity to advance the climate agenda in favor of the most climate vulnerable countries such as LDCs. This calls for consistent and quality finance, as well as finance that resonates with the call of the Istanbul Program of Action, calling for 50% of all climate finance to be targeted towards adaptation and 50% of these to be earmarked to climate vulnerable countries such as LDCs and SIDs. We need progress on crucial climate issues such as mitigating loss and damage and action to reduce greenhouse gases. Excellencies and colleagues, it is pleasing to note that for the first time, the largest number of LDCs are in the graduation pipeline. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Bangladesh, the People's Democratic Republic of Laos, and Nepal for meeting, or rather on meeting the graduation criteria for the second time. Congratulations too to Cambodia, the Comoros, Djibouti, Senegal, and Zambia on meeting the criteria for the first time. Graduation is, however, not a panacea, but rather a stepping stone in the LDC's development trajectory. In that respect, it necessitates that the primary focus of the graduation process be aimed at ensuring its sustainability and irreversibility. Continuation of the international support for graduating and graduated countries is vital in this respect. I would therefore like to thank the Committee for Development Policy, CDP, for their work and note their report on the impact of COVID-19 on LDC's graduation. As evidenced by the findings in the report, the reality of COVID-19 is one we still must live with for the foreseeable future. It highlights the fragility of the graduation process, calling for holistic, crisis-sensitive, and responsive actions and efforts. Excellencies and dear colleagues, economic and structural transformation will be essential on the road to 2030 and 2031. Financing and the ability to adequately finance development has long been a key component of sustainable development progress. All LDCs remain committed to optimizing and maximizing domestic resource mobilization. However, official development assistance remains essential for development finance and planning. In this respect, predictable and adaptive financing will be a transforming factor in ensuring consistent sustainable development. Also key to structured transformation is energy, trade, and science, technology, and innovation. In terms of energy, the Asia-Pacific LDCs have made great strides in generation, increasing energy access by over 60% between 2010 and 2018. The Asia-Pacific LDCs as a group missed the IPOA target to double the share of exports as their combined share in the world goods, while the services exports increased from 0.23% in 2011 to 0.38% in 2019. Progress across these overlapping sectors calls for greater investment and capacity building to ensure LDCs are well equipped to maximize sustainable development opportunities. Excellencies and colleagues, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate the importance of multilateralism and cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic has only served to emphasize our interconnectedness and the crucial role of partnership in the overcoming and addressing global challenges. In this regard, no one is safe until we are all safe. Vaccine access by all is a must, and in order to ensure global safety and progress, I would like to thank all partners and fellow LDCs for your engagement and support throughout this process, and look forward to discussions that prioritize optimal LDC sustainable development. I would like to thank the government of the state of Qatar for its firm commitment to make the LDC-5 a success and for its generous support for successful preparation of the conference. I would further like to thank the UN system, particularly OHRLLS, for their tireless work and efforts in the build-up to Doha. I look forward to listening, participating, learning throughout this week, and to in-depth and frank conversation. And thank you once again to the hosts. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank you, Honorable Foreign Minister, for your important directions and comprehensive statement, and take this opportunity to thank you once again and your outstanding team in New York for the strong leadership that you're providing to our group, especially now as we prepare for LDC 5. Thank you, sir. I would now like to invite His Excellency Mr. Farouk Kemaksi, Ambassador and Deputy Foreign Minister and Director for EU Affairs, Turkey, to deliver a virtual statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear Ministers, Excellencies, it's an honor for me to address you today on behalf of Turkey as the co-chair of the group of friends of the least developed countries and the host of the 4th LDC conference. I would like to start by thanking His Excellency Abdul Momun, Mr. Ratray, Madam Alice Yahbana for organizing this meeting and the invitation. I wish to congratulate Bangladesh, Laos, and Nepal as they have recently been recommended for graduation from the LDC category. Their commitment to graduate comes despite the number of humanitarian and socio-economic challenges, including the COVID-19. Bangladesh has also set an extraordinary humanitarian example by opening its doors to more than 1 million refugees. The international community should set up its efforts to share this heavy burden. Another challenge is the dire humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. At least 18.4 million people need urgent humanitarian assistance. The massive outflow of the Afghan people is a growing tragedy that requires our utmost attention and care. International community should coordinate an effective response. Distinguished participants, the Istanbul Program of Action has contributed greatly to the LDC's graduation and implementing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. However, much remains to be done, and the COVID-19 complicates the situation in graduating LDCs alongside many others. Therefore, the extension of the preparatory period for graduating LDCs would be an important step towards putting in place effective support mechanisms. The LDC5 conference in 2022 in Doha will be a unique opportunity to discuss the ways to strengthen the existing mechanisms or establishing new tools to provide an integrated support to graduating LDCs. We should consider LDC-specific international support measures, such as duty-free and quota-free market access to graduating LDCs on a case-by-case basis. The international financial institutions, including the multilateral development banks, should provide a coordinated and tailored response to the needs of the graduating LDCs, including in debt treatment. We should also discuss the options to extend the scope of beneficiaries of the UN Technology Bank in Gebze to accelerate graduating process. Excellencies, Turkey's Asia-New initiative intends to enhance cooperation with our Asia-Pacific partners. We are ready to cooperate with LDCs in the region to accelerate their graduation. That is why we have prepared an inventory of 123 points of actions specified for several LDCs in the Asia-Pacific to be taken over the next 2 years with feedback from our embassies in the region. Our efforts will be based on common priorities and take into account the diversity and particular needs of our partners to achieve tangible results. Turkey, in line with its enterprising and humanitarian foreign policy, also undertakes humanitarian activities in both Myanmar and Bangladesh to alleviate the suffering of the Rohingya. Turkish aid projects since 2012 have amounted to more than $70 million in value in these countries. We also work to expand the scope of cooperation with the Pacific Island states as a post-forum dialogue partner of the Pacific Islands Forum. Besides its bilateral development assistance, Turkey focuses on putting the LDCs at the center of multilateral efforts. In cooperation with the UNDP Regional Hub that we host in Istanbul, we have been carrying out a program focusing on LDCs in Southeast Asia and Africa. Selected projects of the 5 LDCs were funded under this program. Moreover, in cooperation with the UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development, Turkey's success in supplying personal protective equipment was modeled to be replicated by other developing countries, and many LDCs will be supported within this framework. Further, as the chairman of the Standing Committee for Economic and Commercial Cooperation of the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation, COMSEC, where 21 of 57 members are LDCs, Turkey has been conducting a financial support program. Since 2014, 26 projects of LDCs have been supported. This year, we are financing 13 projects from 10 LDCs under the COMSEC. From the very beginning, we supported G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative and its extensions in order to provide poor countries and the most needed space to combat with the social and economic impacts of the pandemic. As a timely and substantial step, we also support a new general special drawing rights allocation. Turkey will continue to support LDCs and graduating countries both bilaterally and at the multilateral platforms with the understanding of leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Deputy Foreign Minister, for your kind statement, and thank you also for joining us virtually. We are very grateful for Turkey's continued support for the implementation of the IPOA and now in preparing for the LDC5 conference. Thank you very much, Minister. We now have the last speaker for this opening session, and I have the pleasure now to invite Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, Director of the Development Cooperation Directorate at OECD, to also deliver a virtual statement. Mr. da Silva, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, Ambassador Rabab Fatma, Excellencies, distinguished participants. LDCs in the Asia-Pacific face unique vulnerabilities, as we have heard today, which have been exacerbated by the current crisis. Inequalities have grown both between and within countries, including through our collective global failure to ensure more equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines, tests, and treatments. The region has also faced new levels of geopolitical tension, fueled in part by the rise of vaccine diplomacy, although the DAC financed more than 80% of the global ACT accelerator mechanism. According to our OECD recent estimates, the SDG financing gap in developing countries, $2.5 trillion before the crisis, had increased by at least 50%, driven by falls in tax, trade, remittances, and foreign direct investment. For LDCs, the impact of COVID has been devastating. COVID-19 has magnified the SDG financing gap due to a scissors effect of increasing needs on one side and decreasing available resources on the other. Graduating LDCs, many of whom rely on tourism, have also been hit hard due to global falls in travel and transport, as well as by disruptions to trade and the drop in some commodity prices. Furthermore, the COVID-19 crisis further amplifies that challenges faced by graduating LDCs. Here, the graduating or recently graduated LDCs are at high risk of setbacks because they also have a large proportion of their populations who are still close to the poverty line. Overall, we see a vicious cycle. As the middle class slips back, there is a drop in trade and investment attractiveness, followed by a corresponding rise in debt default, higher risk perception, and higher reliance on official development assistance, ODA. For many countries, the COVID-19 crisis may represent the debt crisis tipping point. While fiscal stimulus has worked for some larger economies, for LDCs there is often not sufficient fiscal space to address the development challenges. Asia-Pacific LDCs are a case in point here, with their economies injecting less than 2% of GDP in the form of urgent social protection and other measures to support people and businesses in response to COVID-19. Now is the time for international community to urgently step up our development cooperation efforts, or else risking losing a decade of progress towards SDGs. Failure to do so will mean, according to ESCAP, that an additional 12 million people in LDCs in the Asia-Pacific falling below the poverty line due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Development assistance members, DAC, have demonstrated that there is continued political will and solidarity despite the crisis. And ODA has once again proven its value as a counter-cyclical flow. For the past 2 decades, aid to LDCs has grown twice as fast as aid to non-LDCs. Today, ODA still makes up to 2/3 of external financial flows to LDCs. And according to our latest 2020 data, in the first year of the pandemic, we have seen ODA to LDCs increase by almost 2% in real terms compared to the previous year. Nevertheless, LDCs continue to face many financing challenges. In 2019, DAC countries dedicated just 0.09% of their GNI to LDCs, still a far cry from their commitment to dedicate 0.15 to 0.20% of their GNI to the world's poorest and most vulnerable countries. Beyond aid, LDCs also face many other challenges. To begin with, this high dependence on ODA has created increasing financing gaps for transition countries, particularly for social sectors. And in addition, LDCs face difficulties in mobilizing domestic resources and private finance. For example, only 6% of blended finance goes to LDCs. Finally, increasing climate, environment, and biodiversity challenges are also placing increased pressure on LDCs. So the question is, what can be done to address these problems? Overall, more finance is needed, but also better quality finance for trade and investment to shift the trillions in our global financial system and to create win-win opportunities for both developing countries and providers of development finance. Here, the joint OECD UNDP framework and other tools for SDG-aligned finance proposes a number of ways in which sustainable recovery in OECD countries can ensure that assistance is also provided to developing countries for bankable, SDG-compatible projects, for example, through blended finance and debt swaps. We support the creation of a global advisory pool mechanism to help countries choose the best partners and to negotiate the best terms and conditions of financing to implement SDG financing strategies without reducing credit worthiness. Importantly, this year, the DAC has also made a commitment to a new community of practice on poverty and inequalities. In addition to looking at the financial aspects, the new community of practice looks to build a shared understanding and collective commitment among DAC members to addressing poverty and inequalities. Essentially, this is about increasing momentum across development cooperation providers to refocus their efforts on addressing poverty and inequality and working out what actions are needed from development providers to achieve SDGs 1 and 10. Let me conclude by reaffirming the OECD DAC commitment to LDCs. We look forward not just to integrating the outcomes from the LDC 5 process into our own political discussions, but to following them up with real and very concrete actions. I thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, for your statement and for reiterating OECD's continued support to the LDCs and for the LDC 5 conference, and we look forward to remaining closely engaged. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, with this we come to the end of the opening session, and I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all once again, especially our distinguished speakers, for making time to join us this morning and for their valuable contributions, which have certainly set the tone for our meeting this week and provided us with important directions. A summary of their statements will be duly reflected in the official summary of the meeting. The opening session is hereby adjourned. Excellencies, we'll move now straight to the next session because we have run over time for the opening session, and the next session is a Ministerial Dialogue. I'll now invite the Honorable Foreign Minister of Bangladesh to take the chair's place and allow us, distinguished colleagues, a few minutes to arrange the podium. Thank you very much. Sir. Sir. Thank you, sir.
প্রথমে ওপেনিং স্টেটমেন্টটা পড়ুন, তারপর যদি সময় থাকে
So let me start this session, okay? Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I call this meeting to order. Peace be upon you. I warmly welcome you all to the first session of the Asia-Pacific Regional Review on the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action in preparation for the 5th United Nations Conference on Less Developed Countries. The theme of this ministerial dialogue is the lessons learned in the implementation of Istanbul Programme of Action, challenges encountered, and the way forward. At the outset, allow me to share with you some personal experiences. We adopted the Istanbul Programme of Action in 2011 with high ambitions. As one of the architects of the Istanbul Programme of Action, in my earlier incarnation as the permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations and ex-chairman of the LDCs for a couple of times and bureau member of IPOA, we set a number of ambitious goals for the LDCs for the decade of 2011 to 2020, aiming at bringing a transformative changes in the lives of 1 billion people of the earth. We envisioned that we would meet in 2021 with only 25 LDCs, as we set a landmark goal to reduce number of LDCs by half. We also set benchmarks that our countries will achieve 7% growth rate, double the share of exports by 2020, and every person in our country will have access to internet by 2020. In Istanbul, the international community also decided that a new regime would be established to foster investment in LDCs, and in resilience building mechanism will be set up in each LDC. We are very enthusiastic in Istanbul that our development partners made unwavering commitment to provide the Istanbul agenda into concrete actions. They made an unwavering pledge that they would provide 0.20 and 0.15% of the GNI as ODA to LDCs, and accentuate the exorbitant burden of external debt and debt service obligations. Now in 2021, with the Istanbul Programme of Action having come to an end, it is time to take stock of the successes achieved and the challenges encountered by our countries. When we look at the statistics, we see that while, of course, there are some progresses, but not so much to celebrate. As a policymaker of an LDC, I see how forcibly my own country was, as well as countries of my region, are struggling to get rid of the menace of extreme poverty, hunger, and health hazards, and achieve the sustainable development goals. Despite our relentless efforts, the real progress on the ground against various ambitions yardstick set out in the IPOA is very, very limited. Let us quickly look at some of the recent statistics. Overall, we have made some progress as a group. The Asia-Pacific LDCs have registered 6.4% GDP growth rate during 2011 through 2019. However, they made very limited progress in productive capacity building and structural transformation. Countries of this region also face difficulties in diversifying manufacturing base as well as export markets. While some progress has been achieved in the internet penetration and access to energy, achieving universal coverage continues to remain a major challenge. Our countries are also lagging seriously behind in the areas of science, technology, and innovations. With approximately 90% primary school enrollment rate, more efforts are required to achieve universal access to education as set out in the IPOA. Furthermore, access to shelter, water, and sanitation remains a major hurdle for many of our countries. If we do a critical analysis and soul-searching to examine why the Istanbul Programme of Action, which was adopted with so much enthusiasm, ended up mostly as an unfinished agenda, we can safely conclude that two major factors are responsible for this failure. First, our countries are highly vulnerable to external shocks, including those posed by climate change and natural disasters, volatility in commodity prices, and various health hazards such as COVID-19. Many of our countries, especially small island and low-lying coastal countries like my own country, Bangladesh, are at the front line in terms of impacts of climate change. Disasters like flood, droughts, cyclones, tsunamis, heat waves, and salinity intrusion are causing serious damage to our lives and livelihoods relentlessly. Similarly, the outbreak of COVID-19 has wiped out our years of development gains, which are earned by the sweats of our brow. Second, means of implementation is the single most constraints in our efforts to achieve the goals and targets of the IPOA and the 2030 agenda. Despite strong promises by our development partners and skyrocketing needs of the external support, paradoxically, the ratio of ODA to gross national income for Asia-Pacific LDCs has declined from 4.3% in 2011 to 2.7% in 2018. Our combined share in world goods and services exports increased from 0.23% in 2011 to merely 0.38% in 2019 against the IPOA target of 0.46%. While some countries in the region benefited from the multilateral debt relief initiatives, including the debt service suspension initiative, in the light of rising spending needs and economic contraction due to the COVID-19 pandemic, public debt in most Asia-Pacific LDCs is estimated to have increased in 2020 by around 5.9 percentage points of GDP. Our scarce resources are being diverted from much-needed social protection support to service our external debt. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, drawing lessons from the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action, it is incumbent upon us to suggest the elements for the new Programme of Action that will enable our countries to address the bottlenecks, build resilience, and accelerate the implementation of the 2030 agenda in the LDCs. We need to be bold, decisive, innovative, and ambitious in setting the agenda of countries for the next decade. We need a new generation of international support measures and the architecture that will channel adequate financial resources to LDCs to meet the funding gaps. We also need access to technologies to bring a transformative change in our production, distribution, and consumption methods by ensuring sustainability with the application of modern science, technology, and innovations. In this session, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to hearing from our keynote presenters, panelists and speakers about the challenges that they have faced and how they have tackled these head-on. I'm very happy to see that some of the key actors who are responsible for designing the next program of action are present here with us today. This includes the chair of LDC's Honorable Foreign Ministers of Malawi, the co-chairs of the preparatory committee, which include my own peer ambassador, my colleague Rabah Fatima, as well as some bureau members of the LDCs. I also recognize the presence of some key development partners in this room and of course online. I am fully confident that with their presence here today, our discussions and deliberations will see due reflections in next program of action for LDCs to be adopted at the 5th UN Conference on LDCs to be held in Doha, Qatar. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I now invite my friend and colleague, His Excellency, Mr. Courtney Rattray, High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, small island developing states, OHRLs. You have the floor, sir.
His Excellency Dr. A.K. Abdul Momen, Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, my colleagues from the UN system, ladies and gentlemen, over the 10-year period of the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action, a record number of LDCs have reached graduation thresholds. In fact, 16 LDCs have reached the graduation thresholds on at least one occasion. 4 LDCs are scheduled to graduate: Angola, Bhutan, Sao Tome and Principe, and the Solomon Islands. In addition, at its last session of the ECOSOC, it endorsed recommendations for Bangladesh, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and Nepal to graduate within a 5-year preparatory period. Excellencies, dear colleagues, this represents progress. However, the Istanbul Programme of Action's target of enabling half the LDCs to meet the criteria for graduation was not met. Important advances have been made during the implementation of the IPOA in several key areas, especially in access to information and communications technology, sustainable energy, health, education, gender, and governance. Yet still, progress has been uneven among and within LDCs, and critical gaps remain. As we heard earlier from Mr. Moreira da Silva of the OECD, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on LDCs. Over and above the immediate health challenges, the pandemic has led to severe socioeconomic disruption with reduced exports, falling GDP, declining FDI and remittance flows, and worsening debt situations. This confluence of factors will result in increased inequalities, increased poverty, and increased food security, and a worsening of the impacts of climate change. Given the critical nature of the situation, it is clear that any progress made on the Istanbul Programme of Action is likely to be reversed. We will therefore need to redouble our efforts to ensure that LDCs move forward. LDC 5 presents an opportunity for us to recover lost ground on the SDGs, to make important strides forward in the decade for action, and to leave no one behind. At the conference in Doha, we must focus attention on ensuring that LDCs recover from the pandemic, which will require that they secure equitable and timely access to COVID-19 vaccines. While the international community must honor their commitments by reversing the decline in ODA to LDCs. For their part, LDCs must undertake steps to increase their fiscal space, including by improving tax collection and pursuing debt relief and debt reduction measures. A long-term solution to the debt situation is urgently needed. And beyond that, we must look at innovative financing requirements needed for recovery and resilience building. The unfinished business of the Istanbul Programme of Action must be completed. Eradicating extreme poverty, addressing food insecurity, and providing decent livelihoods in the LDCs stand out as high priorities. Enhanced support is needed for climate adaptation and to enhance the capacity to access climate funds and to ensure policies are disaster risk informed. Throughout the entire process, we must continue to strive for equality, for inclusion, and the socioeconomic empowerment of all women and girls. We must also address the need to build peaceful, just, and inclusive societies that provide equal access to justice based on the full respect for human rights. With a record number of LDCs meeting graduation thresholds, we must step up support for graduating LDCs. This will require additional flexibility from development partners on smooth transitions, as well as strengthened UN support for graduating LDCs. With these priorities in mind, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm pleased to note that a very strong start was made during negotiations of the LDC 5 outcome document at PrepCom 1 and PrepCom 2 in New York. I'm confident that the Asia-Pacific Regional Review meeting will further inform the intergovernmental negotiations on the Doha outcome document and look forward to hearing concrete recommendations on how to make graduation sustainable, irreversible, and a stepping stone to achieve the 2030 agenda. Excellencies, in my capacity as Secretary General of the conference, I invite you once again to proactively participate at the LDC 5 preparatory process, as well as the multiple global processes from now until January 2022, such as UNCTAD 15 and COP 26. These are valuable opportunities to build momentum towards LDC 5. I thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency Courtney Rattray, the Under-Secretary General of HRLS. Now, I have the privilege to request Ms. Armida Shalcia, Alice Zahabana, Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, and she will be presenting her through virtual presentation. You have the floor, Madam.
Excellency Minister Abdul Momen, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to deliver key highlights on lessons learned in the implementation of the Istanbul Programme of Action for LDCs, especially in the context of Asia-Pacific region. The LDCs in our region have made significant progress in implementing the Istanbul Programme of Action. During the decade covered by the program, 3 Asia-Pacific countries were able to graduate from the category of LDCs, while 10 of the remaining 12 LDCs have met the criteria for graduation. This is a remarkable achievement. Yet the Istanbul Programme of Action was not fully implemented. Progress in building productive capacities and achieving structural transformation has been limited in most LDCs, and dependence on a few products or a single sector is still very common. This makes these economies vulnerable to external shocks, as exemplified the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has led, next slide please, the pandemic has led to considerable reduction in economic growth in the region's LDCs. Before the pandemic, they were growing at a weighted average of 7.2%. Yet in the final year of the IPOA, growth was only an estimated of 3% on average. The pandemic has led to widespread unemployment, particularly in the informal sector. Export from Asia Pacific LDCs contracted more than the global average, while FDI flows and remittances declined because of disruptions caused by the pandemic. This comes on top of the declining share of total ODA allocated to all LDCs. COVID-19 pandemic has also compounded existing social vulnerabilities. It has led to higher poverty rates and exacerbated inequality, particularly those related to gender. Up to an additional 12 million people in Asia Pacific LDCs could fall below the $3.2 daily income poverty line owing to the pandemic, while multidimensional poverty is also on the rise. Education systems have also been severely disrupted by the pandemic, which will impact development prospects for decades to come. Addressing multidimensional poverty is becoming more and more complex against this background. Next slide, please. Looking forward, let me discuss 4 priorities for Asia Pacific LDCs for the next decade and corresponding challenges and opportunities. First, the pandemic has highlighted the need to strengthen public health and social protection systems to support people in times of unanticipated shocks and to achieve social resilience. Investment in healthcare infrastructure and services is only 0.6% of GDP in the region's LDC, compared to an average of 2.7% for other developing countries in the region, while only 1 in 5 people was covered by at least one social protection benefit in 2019 in the region LDCs, compared to 6 out of 10% in other developing countries in the region. Fortunately, the pandemic has resulted in a rising consensus about the need for such systems to prevent the poor and other vulnerable groups from being trapped in or falling into poverty. Indeed, in October last year, ESCAP member states endorsed the action plan to strengthen regional cooperation on social protection in Asia and the Pacific. Through this plan, we will enhance the capacity of member states to build and strengthen inclusive social protection system. Second, resource mobilization efforts must be enhanced. Even before the pandemic, LDCs face a financing gap estimated at 60% of their combined GDP to achieve SDG. Ensuring a sustained economic recovery will require continued policy support while finding means to finance the rising fiscal deficit and tackle debt sustainability concern amid declining external flows. For instance, FDI flows to Bangladesh dropped 31% in the third quarter of 2020 compared to the previous year. Nevertheless, the time is opportune to develop post-COVID recovery strategy that can be tailored to address the gaps that have held back financial deepening and expand the range of financial products and services as a policy priority. One important element is to strengthen tax revenue, particularly in those LDCs where government revenues remain below 10% of GDP in 2020. This can be done by broadening tax bases and tackling tax avoidance and tax evasion through upgraded national tax system, modern taxpayer databases, and streamlined revenue collection processes. Asia Pacific LDCs must also take better advantage of global markets for thematic bonds, such as green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and climate bonds to finance the SDGs. Third, productive capacities need to be strengthened, and structural economic transformation must be promoted to address multidimensional poverty. Asia Pacific LDCs are characterized by limited productive capacities and export dependence on a handful of sectors. Most LDCs remain structurally underdeveloped, with agriculture being the largest sector in terms of employment, accounting on average for more than half of total labor force. As a result, export dependence on few sectors is high. Unfortunately, for some LDCs, particularly small island LDCs, the scope for industrialization is quite limited. In terms of opportunities, LDCs can reduce their exposure to future risk and uncertainty by diversifying their economic structure and better positioning themselves in global and regional value chain. Governments can increase their efforts to expand trade capacity and move up in the resilient regional value chain through initiatives such as the Framework Agreement on Facilitation of Cross-Border Paperless Trade, which is a promising initiative. We are also providing support to member states by conducting legal and technical readiness assessments. Harnessing new digital technology is another way forward. In this area, ESCAP is supporting, for instance, digital adaptation of MSME in Cambodia and Laos PDR, and creation of enabling MSMEs e-commerce environment. As a fourth and final point, slide number 7, please. The pandemic has demonstrated that LDCs are not well prepared to deal with multiple overlapping crises. The triple threat of disease, disaster, and climate change is causing human hardship and significant economic losses, with our latest Asia-Pacific disaster report estimating that the annual average disaster-related losses could nearly double to around $1.4 trillion in a worst-case climate scenario. An important concern for graduating LDC is to prepare for a smooth transition. This requires early preparation. Graduation issues are mainstream into national development plans. Governments would do well to acquire a more holistic focus on sustainability in their preparation for graduation and smooth transition, acknowledging that economic growth alone is not sufficient to ensure sustainable development. In conclusion, with only 8 years left till 2030, I encourage policymakers from LDCs and the development partners to initiate a socio-economic recovery that is consistent with the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals. In this regard, forging development cooperation and extending international support measures to LDCs are essential policy tools in building back better and deepening resilience of the region's most vulnerable countries, the LDCs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It is now my singular honor to ask Mr. Kumal Sen, Director, United Nations University World Institute for Development Economic Research, to take the floor virtually.
Thank you, Your Excellency, distinguished guests and colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here in this very important high-level Asia-Pacific Regional Review meeting on the Istanbul Programme of Action. My specific set of questions that I would like to address is, what exactly are the challenges that we are seeing of LDCs in the Asia-Pacific region, and how we can overcome these challenges? So I see the following 5 challenges as our greatest challenges the LDCs are facing in the Asia-Pacific region. The first challenge is weak economic growth, especially in the small island LDCs, where economic growth has averaged only 2.7% in 2011-2019. This implies that the living standards of many Asia-Pacific LDCs are not converging to the levels of fast-growing economies in the Northeast Asia and Southeast Asian region, which also means with the pandemic's effects on economic growth that we already observed last year and will so this year, we'll see particularly large increase in poverty. So that's a very serious challenge we need to address. The second challenge is the challenge of lack of productive capacity. The gap in productive capacity of the Asia-Pacific LDCs and other Asia-Pacific developing countries has not narrowed in the Istanbul Programme of Action implementation period. In fact, except for Myanmar, Cambodia, and Bangladesh, no other Asia-Pacific LDC has observed an increase in manufacturing activities in the period 2011-2019. Agriculture still remains the major source of value added and employment. Where the movement has been onto agriculture, what we have seen is mostly a movement into low productivity, informal employment in services. So that's the second challenge that we observe among Asia-Pacific LDCs. The third challenge is a lack of diversification of exports and high commodity dependence. We see excessive dependence on a few products in the export baskets of Asia-Pacific LDCs. For example, many countries seem to specialize in one product with respect to exports. For example, wearing apparel. That's a really serious problem. And we're seeing that 7 of the 12 Asia-Pacific LDCs are commodity dependent and have seen actually increase in average share of commodity exports from 55% to 60% in the IPOA implementation period. So things have got worse as far as commodity dependence is concerned in many of the Asia-Pacific LDCs. Fourth, vulnerability to climate risk and other environmental shocks is obviously a very serious challenge. Extreme weather events have an adverse effect on Asia-Pacific LDCs, and we've already seen many events of this kind. Myanmar is the second most climate risk affected country in the world. Bangladesh the 6th, Nepal the 9th. Climate change poses serious threats to the Pacific Islands LDCs too. And again, this is a serious challenge we will see more and more of in the years forward. The fifth challenge, I would say, is possible loss of preferential market access, such as the European Union's anything but arms agreement for many LDCs that might graduate in the next few years. For as most of the successful exporters among LDCs specialize in products that are price sensitive, such as wearing apparel, the possible tariff increases may lead to loss in competitiveness, having a detrimental effect on exports, and clearly, therefore, a detrimental effect on economic growth. And that's a really serious issue that we need to think about in the coming years. How do we address these challenges? Well, one would propose 4 ways of doing so. First, there has to be concerted investment in productive capacity, especially in human capital development, infrastructure, and energy, along with the facilitating environment for private sector development. This will not only build productive capacity, but also contribute to high economic growth and diversification exports. So effectively, by investing in productive capacity, you're addressing 3 challenges at the same time, and that's why this is so important. The second way one can address the challenges is to take appropriate actions that are needed to minimize disaster risk, as well as vulnerability to climate change. So for example, we need to have more use of the LDC Climate Fund, the Green Climate Fund. We need to develop and implement national mitigation and adaptation strategies. This must be a priority in the coming years. The third way that one can try to address the challenges is something that we are absolutely clear about in the wake of the pandemic. We need to have a concerted effort to improve health and sanitation and social protection systems to build resilience to future pandemics. This is not the only time we will get to see pandemics. We need to build for the future. We've already seen that underinvestment in health and sanitation systems have had detrimental effects on outcomes because of the pandemic. The final way that we need to think about moving forward is how do we bring development partners and national governments together to augment the scarce domestic resources that Asia-Pacific LDCs have to invest in critical public goods, health and sanitation is obviously one of them, as well as to ensure more equitable and rules-based multilateral governance system. This is really important, especially if we're going to see loss of preferential access to markets in the West as we move forward in the coming years. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much. We will now have speakers from the floor, and it is my singular honor to have a pre-recorded statement from His Excellency Mr. Komasiti, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Laos People's Democratic Republic. You have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to you, Mr. Chairman, the Office of the UN High Representative for LDCs, LDC and SEEDs, and Office of UN ESCAP for organizing this Asia-Pacific Regional Review on the implementation of Istanbul Program of Action as we prepare for the global review of the 5th UN Conference on LDCs to be held early next year in Doha, Qatar. The IPOA and Istanbul Declaration has provided an important platform for LDCs and international community to pool the collective efforts to help achieve the ambitious targets of halving the number of LDCs by 2021. Throughout the decades of its implementation, we witnessed a number of significant achievements. However, we are far behind the target set. Only 3 countries have met criteria for graduation from LDCs in 2021 triennial review, including my own country. Nonetheless, the advent of COVID-19 pandemic has overwhelmed the achievements we have made so far and already undermined our ability to sustain the progress we made towards graduation. Mr. Chairman, let me share our lessons on what we have done in terms of implementations of IPOA. Together with the government's lofty goals of graduating from LDC status by 2020, we have integrated IPOA into our 7th and 8th 5-year National Socio-Economic Development Plan for 2011, 2015, and 2016, 2020, respectively. Thus, throughout the years of its implementation, considerable progress has been steadily made, as reflected in the outcome of the 2 consecutive triennial review by the Committee on Policy Development. At the 2018 review, the Lao PDR met 2 out of 3 criteria, whereas the 2021 review, we met all 3 criteria. This is, however, based on the data collection prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and may not reflect the actual situations we are all facing now. In this connection, it is an opportune time for us to take stock of what we have achieved and shortfalls that needs to be tackled by taking into account of all possible challenges and impacts on LDC graduation efforts, while we are embarking on the new program of cooperation framework. Let me share some of our initial thoughts on this issue. First, the IPOA has been a good platform for collective action, and it has taken a holistic view in helping the LDC to overcome their specific challenges and special needs to enable them to develop and graduate from LDCs. So its fundamental principles should be kept intact and further incorporated into the new program of action. Second, as LDCs in itself signifies its handicap in a number of areas. In particular, under the 3 criteria for graduation, it therefore requires enhanced international support and assistance for them to stand on their feet and step forward, be it on financial, technical, and humanitarian capacity development assistance. Third, to build back better from COVID-19 pandemic and resilience from future shocks, the new program of action should take into account the health dimension as emerging threats and response readiness. The post-pandemic recovery should focus on debt sustainability and financial access. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for LDCs to invest in critical areas that are most needed for continued development. Last but not least, we welcome the flexible transition period, according to us, from 3 to 5 years. But we need to stress that the assistance and support from international community in its transition period is also utmost important for smooth graduation. And if possible, it should be reflected in the new program of action. Should we expect a smooth graduation for graduating country? Mr. Chairman, as the Lao PDR is embarking on the transitional period at a time that we are facing the unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We therefore urge the international community to enhance necessary assistance and support to the Lao PDR for a smooth graduation. On our own, we are discussing with UN agencies and development partners for development of a smooth graduation strategy, and we will timely share with you all when it's become available. Let me conclude by stressing that the international community needs to reaffirm the global commitment to addressing the special needs of LDCs, as many LDCs continue facing multiple structural challenges. I would like to also stress that graduation from LDC status should not be an end in itself, but a quality and a smooth graduation. As Lao PDR is concerned, we will actively participate in the formulation of the new program of action that reflects the reality, practicality, and achievability. May I take this opportunity to extend our sincere appreciation and gratitude to the international community and international organizations for the valuable assistance and support extended to my country, and wish further to receive your continued assistance. I wish our meeting a great success. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that statement. We will again have a pre-recorded statement from Her Excellency Mrs. Adalgisa Magno, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste. Floor is granted.
Excellency Chair, Minister of Finance of Bangladesh, Excellency High Representative for the LDCs, landlocked developing countries and seats, Excellency Under Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, I wish to commence by expressing our gratitude to the Government of Bangladesh, High Representative for LDCs and seats, and ESCAP for organizing the high-level Asia-Pacific review meeting on the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action for LDCs in preparation for the 5th United Nations Conference on the least developed countries in Doha, Qatar in January 2022. I take this opportunity to express our heartfelt congratulations on the nomination of the High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, Ambassador Courtney Rattray, and rest assured that you have Timor-Leste's full support. The theme we are addressing today, From Istanbul to Doha, a journey towards sustainable and resilient development, Asia-Pacific Stories for Graduation, focuses on lessons learned as the program of action is implemented, the challenges encountered, and the way forward, which stands to be critical in our deliberations. As noted, many of the LDCs in our region have made some progress and improvement in socio-economic development, yet still encounter challenges in the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action. We are still far from reaching the targets set out by the Committee for Development Policy. Already in 2018, LDCs were not on track to achieve the SDGs even before the pandemic. The persistent structural challenges faced by LDCs remain unresolved, and the continued exposure of the LDCs to vulnerabilities compounded by the effects of climate change and the current COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought a number of challenges for Timor-Leste, including economic and social distress affecting the country's revenue, economic growth, as well as increasing the unemployment rate, and I believe those types of challenges are also prevailing in other Asia-Pacific LDCs and seats. since it has had a global impact and has taken a significant toll on every person's way of life. It has negatively affected global economic growth, significant loss of life, and continuously undermined the well-being of people from all walks of life. The LDCs are the hardest hit of this impact, considering the existing issue that we continue to battle with such extreme poverty, violent conflict, food shortages, and climate-related emergency. The psycho and socio-economic shock of the pandemic has made moving forward adapting challenge and an even more difficult achievement. While many of the LDCs, including Timor-Leste, have reported a small number of COVID-19 cases, the pandemic still has multidimensional effects on LDCs. Many of the LDCs have high levels of external dependency and exposure, as well as low levels of resilience to recover from economic and non-economic shocks. As for Timor-Leste, one of the devastating impacts in a long range will be on the development of human resources, which is one of the substantial conditions for poverty reduction. Due to successive lockdowns as preventive measures against the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, the students have attended the online classes from home, but a great number of students who are from poor families have not been able to do so, since they don't afford to have the electronic devices and money for that purpose. Therefore, it is imperative that the next program of action must address the unfinished business of the realization of the Istanbul Program of Action, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and overcoming the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, the program of action for the next decade shall also, first, initiate sustained socio-economic recovery in the aftermath of the pandemic. Second, take an integrated approach in addressing multidimensional poverty. Third, adjust to the new normal and pursue effective sustainable development strategy. And fourth, revitalize international and regional cooperation. In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic is a tragic milestone, but it has forced us to view things differently. It has required us to reassess our economies, re-examine our societies, and reawaken us to the truth. The health is indeed wealth. Needless to say, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to be a game changer, and we should learn to change with it and forge through it. In light of this, and being that Timor-Leste is on the pathway to graduation from the LDC category, that I respectfully emphasize the importance of reassessing international support measures with a renewed focus, thereby ensuring the Istanbul Program of Action's objective of a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive growth in LDCs. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. We will now be joined virtually by His Excellency Dr. Biswa Nati Podel, Vice Chairman, National Planning Commission of Nepal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to the government of Bangladesh, OHR, LLS, and ESCAP for convening this important meeting despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. This demonstrates our strong solidarity to address our common concerns. Though significant progress has been made across the 8 priority areas of the IPOA by all LDCs over the last decade, the overall level of the implementation has been mixed and uneven. This clearly indicates that the road to sustainable development will not be easy for all the Asia-Pacific LDCs and MN. In Nepal, we have been consistently demonstrating strong political commitment and leadership to eradicate poverty through promoting rapid and inclusive growth. We have integrated global and regional development goals, including the Istanbul Program of Action in our development plan, and made effort for their effective implementation. Nepal has made significant improvement on reducing poverty, providing basic healthcare services, as well as gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. There have also been improvements on access to internet, safe water, sanitation, and renewable energy. The government of Nepal provides a large number of social protection schemes, including allowances for widows, senior citizens, the disabled, child grants, and various employment programs. However, the unfolding of the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our prospects of development with far-reaching socio-economic implications. It has further exacerbated the pre-existing challenges, undermined our hard-earned development gains, and put our graduation plan in peril. Mr. Chairman, as we are preparing for the LDC-5, I would like to highlight some of the issues which deserve our special attention in preparation for the conference. First, the LDC-5 must be a platform to garner enhanced level of support to the most vulnerable countries that are already the furthest behind. Our focus should be on the comprehensive assessment of the implementation of IPOA, identifying obstacles and constraints encountered, as well as actions and initiatives needed to address those challenges. Excuse me. Second, the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic highlight the need to take a more integrated approach in order to increase economic diversification, achieve structural transformation, and reduce vulnerability and poverty of Asia-Pacific LDCs. The overarching goal ahead should be to effectively respond to the pandemic by ensuring an equitable and universal access to COVID-19 vaccines. Nepal calls for meaningful international cooperation to facilitate easy access to vaccines for all. Third, this should be a platform where LDCs and development partners would renew their partnership for doing more on each of their parts. Enhanced support must be provided from the development partners to achieve the SDGs and goals set out in LDC's program of action. Similarly, support measures must be ensured to the countries in the graduation pipeline and to those that have recently graduated. It is even more critical for the resilient recovery from the pandemic and for their smooth, sustainable, and irreversible graduation. Fourth, the pandemic amplifies debt distress in the Asia-Pacific LDCs. We welcome various debt relief measures and call for a comprehensive debt relief initiative, including debt cancellation. Fifth, a full compliance of ODA commitment from our development partners must be ensured. Equal focus should also be given to encourage scaling up FDI and aid for trade in productive sectors in Asia-Pacific LDCs. Sixth, many of Asia-Pacific LDCs are on the wrong end of digital divide, with the lowest rates of internet access. Again, support from development partners can play a vital role to connect the unconnected in LDCs with the whole of society approach. Seventh, LDCs are facing a sharp end of climate change despite their negligible share in GHG emission. Time is now to ensure climate justice and accessible climate finance. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, development aspirations of the Asia-Pacific LDCs have already been significantly deferred. They must not be permanently delayed. We are confident that the LDC-5 will be a milestone of renewed commitments and partnership to ensure a better and sustainable future for the LDCs. Nepal is determined to do more on its part to make its graduation a smooth, sustainable, and irreversible process I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. We will now have an in-person presentation from His Excellency Mr. Nasser Abdul Nasser Baswabi, Vice Minister of Planning and International Cooperation of Yemen.
Thank you very much. It's okay for the voice. I speak Arabic. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. أصحاب السعادة، ضيوف الكرام، سيداتي وسادتي، في البداية أشكركم وأشكر مكتب UNOHRLLS على تنظيم هذا الاجتماع المهم، ويسعدني أن أكون معكم خلال الأيام الأربعة المقبلة لإجراء تقييم شامل لتنفيذ برنامج العمل من قبل أقل البلدان نمواً في العقد الماضي، كما نتطلع إلى تحديد معايير وأولويات للعقد القادم. أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، يمثل برنامج عمل اسطنبول 2011-2020 رؤية طموحة طويلة المدى تهدف إلى التغلب على التحديات الهيكلية. على الصعيد اليمني، دخلت اليمن كما تعلمون دائرة الصراع منذ 2014 نتيجة انقلاب الحوثيين على الدولة والشرعية، ونتيجة لذلك حدث انخفاض غير مسبوق في المؤشرات الاقتصادية والخدمات. تحقيقا لهذه الغاية بذلت الحكومة جهودا كبيرة للتواصل مع الجهات المانحة لتعزيز العلاقات التنموية في اليمن واستئناف إنتاج النفط ومداخيل أخرى مستدامة. ومع ذلك فإن التدخلات الإنسانية لا تزال أكثر على حساب جوانب التنمية، مما أضر بالتنمية وعطل الوضع الاقتصادي والمعيشي. أصحاب السعادة والسيدات والسادة، نود أن نشير إلى أبرز أولويات في العقد القادم بالنسبة لنا نحن والبلدان الأخرى التي تعيش في صراع وسياق هش. رقم 1: إعادة الدولة وإنهاء الانقلاب وتحقيق السلام المستدام وفق مخرجات الحوار الوطني. إعادة الإعمار البنى التحتية المتضررة من الحرب. 3: تنمية الموارد البشرية بالتركيز على تطوير قطاع التعليم والصحة والتوسع في برنامج مكافحة فيروس كورونا. 4: الاهتمام بالشؤون الإنسانية وربطها بالجانب التنموي. 5: تعزيز الشراكة مع القطاع الخاص. 6: التطوير والإصلاح المؤسسي وإعادة بناء مؤسسات الدولة. الضيوف الكرام، أتمنى لكم جميعا نجاحا على مدار هذه الأيام المقبلة، وأود أن أختم بياني بإعادة التأكيد على أن الطريقة الوحيدة للتغلب على هذه الصعوبات التي تواجه أقل البلدان نموا هي التعلم من الدروس السابقة ومساعدة أنفسهم حتى يتمكن الآخرون من مساعدتهم. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We will now have His Excellency Dr. Ryompo Tandi Dorji, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bhutan, and this will be virtual participation.
I'm reading this statement on behalf of my Foreign Minister, Limpo Dr. Tandi Dorji, so I'm presenting this in person. Your Excellency, Mr. Eisenhower Maka, Foreign Minister of Malawi, Mr. Kotene Ratre, Under Secretary General and High Representative of UNOHRLLS, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, Bhutan wishes to congratulate and thank the government of Bangladesh for convening this regional review meeting. We also recognize the support of UNOHRLLS and ESCAP in organizing this meeting. While the global pandemic has undermined the process of our preparation for LDC 5, our collective resolve to the preparatory process leading to a successful LDC-5 remains strong. The need to be united and lend a common voice is more imperative now than ever before, especially in light of the severe economic setback caused by the pandemic around the world, the impact of which has been more severe in the LDCs than anywhere else. We are confident that the discussions and outcome of the Asia-Pacific Regional Review meeting will enrich the ongoing negotiations in New York, leading to a comprehensive, actionable draft outcome document which will meet our collective aspirations. We note with satisfaction the progress we have made thus far and the spirit behind it. We look forward to continuing our constructive engagement, and we are confident that our partners will extend their full support and cooperation in this regard. Excellencies, the overall objective of the IPOA was to overcome the structural problems encountered by the LDCs in order to eradicate poverty, achieve internationally agreed development goals, and ultimately enable graduation from the LDC category. The results have been far from satisfactory. While most LDCs were falling short of the set goals, the unexpected emergence of COVID-19 threatens to scrape away the gains we have made thus far. That said, it is only appropriate we acknowledge the commendable progress LDCs in the Asia-Pacific region have made. Across all the 8 priorities of IPOA, significant progress and enriching national experiences exist that can serve as a useful reference for fellow LDCs beyond the region. The fact that 9 out of 12 LDCs in the region are at varying stages of graduation itself speaks of the commendable progress. Going forward, we must attain total graduation in the region by the end of LDC-5 in 2031. As long as the political will of national governments and the steadfast support of our partners remain, this is an achievable goal. And we cannot hope for anything less than this, and we owe it to ourselves. Excellencies, it has been almost 2 years since the world has been gripped by the pandemic. Bhutan has, to a large extent, successfully contained the spread and enhanced the existing social protection system. For us, the key to our success in containing and fully vaccinating almost 90% of our eligible population has been our leadership in His Majesty the King, who tirelessly advocated and traveled throughout the country to ensure the safety, security, and well-being of our people. Bhutan has, from the start of the crisis, joined international partners in advocating for equitable access to safe and reliable vaccines and to vaccine sharing. We were moved by the outpouring of support and generosity received from our partners. Their critical contributions of vaccines to Bhutan responded to our moment of greatest need and will not be forgotten. The noble objective of the COVAX facility and the UN system supporting in facilitating swift and efficient delivery merits particular recognition. In all of this, the resounding lesson thus has been of interdependence and global solidarity, that we can only get through such a crisis through a more rejuvenated multilateralism. Our belief in the strengths of multilateralism to help us tide over the pandemic, as also many other global issues, must remain resolute. At the same time, Bhutan is already drawing important lessons from responding to and dealing with the pandemic. This includes, among others, the need and possibilities for long-term, transformative and green solutions for its food system, local economy, public service delivery, approaches to learning, data ecosystem, and preparedness for disaster and future pandemics. Excellencies, drawing from our national experience in implementation of the IPOA, and as is observed to be the case across many LDCs, there is a need for renewed focus on expanding the productive capacity of economies to achieve meaningful structural transformation and spur growth across all spheres of sustainable development. In this regard, the potential of science, technology, and innovation, particularly digital technologies that could enable us to leapfrog, must be harnessed to promote structural transformation of economies, eradicate poverty, and achieve sustainable development. An important step in that direction is to ensure that the technology gap in the LDCs be closed. In this regard, Bhutan recognized the work of organizations like the UN Technology Bank, as well as the need to strengthen the resource base to deliver LDCs with concrete policy options on the ground. Climate change remains the biggest single threat to our sustainable development. Himalayan glaciers are melting at alarming rates. Erratic and high-intensity rainfall are resulting in damaging floods and landslides. Drying up of water sources, incidences of forest fires, and outbreak of crop diseases are all on the rise. This calls for substantial investment to enhance resilience to adapt to the adverse impact of climate change. On our part, Bhutan is committed to uphold its 2009 commitment to remain carbon neutral and has also submitted its second NDCs in June this year. Our second NDC not only reaffirms our commitment to remain carbon neutral as pledged in its first NDC, but also presents enhanced targets, measures, and actions to integrate and mainstream climate priorities into Bhutan's development planning and policies. Another important priority going forward is the need to ensure the sustainability of development momentum through the predictability and continuity of international support measures for newly graduated LDCs. Predictability in international support measures needs to be based on country-specific situations and vulnerabilities and should not be the basis for consideration of such measures by our partners. We are currently formulating our transition strategy in preparation for our graduation from the LDC category in December 2023. The focus is on building resilience while addressing remaining structural challenges and adjusting the loss of LDC benefits. We need to develop on our effort in three main areas of improving key social outcomes, building economic resilience, and managing the impacts of climate change. Towards this, the continued support and cooperation of our partners remains critical, especially to ensure that there is no disruption in our development process and help put in place strengthened post-graduation support measures. In doing so, the Royal Government of Bhutan looks forward to strengthening cooperation with its development partners, including civil societies and the private sector, so that the progress towards an inclusive, low-carbon, and resilient development pathway can be sustained. Finally, I wish all distinguished speakers and participants a fruitful session ahead, and I wish all of you a wonderful stay in Geneva. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that statement. We will now have a statement from His Excellency Mr. Sewi Penu, Finance Minister of Tuvalu, and the statement will be read by His Excellency Mr. Samuel Laitonu here. Thank you.
Excellency Foreign Minister Eisenhower Makaka and Foreign Minister Abdul Momen, Honorable Ministers, Under Secretary General Courtney Rattray, Executive Secretary of ESCAP Amida Alistepana, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. LDC 5 and the new Program of Action for LDC will be an important opportunity to demonstrate improved international support to LDCs. Supports that must target the multidimensional vulnerabilities of LDCs in a contextualized manner with the transparent and inclusive engagement on priorities defined by LDCs. For Tuvalu, our extreme vulnerability to climate change and natural disasters have impeded our progress to achieving the SDGs, including the IPOA targets. The costs of continuous rebuilding due to frequent and more intense natural disasters such as prolonged dry periods and tropical cyclones have narrowed the fiscal space and policy space for essential public services such as health, education, and social protection programs. In the same manner, COVID-19 pandemic has reversed many hard-won gains and stalled progress in many areas, leading to the loss of years of development progress. So there is an urgent need to mobilize financial resources for building resilience as well as for climate change adaptation. Moreover, accessing development finance remains an uphill battle. LDC 5 and the new Program of Action for LDC should therefore deliver on increased international assistance to LDC. Tuvalu had mainstreamed climate vulnerability and resilience building to its national sustainable development strategy, Decade 2020 to 2030, which also adopted the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, including the IPOA targets. However, our remoteness and small geographical size, small population, narrow economic base, and vulnerability to external shocks means that we need targeted economic interventions and support. We know that international support will only work for us if they target resilience, social economic infrastructure, and productive capacities for small economies that lack the economies of scale. Productive capacities with the right policies will generate employment and economic activities and bring needed transformational changes to our small economy. We note the importance of digital transformation for sustainable development and enhancing productive efficiency and to drive down transaction costs. This is very important for small LDC economies as Tuvalu. However, the unprecedented digital transformation in developed countries has widened the digital gap, risking developing countries of being left further behind, given their lack of human capacity and critical IT infrastructure. International assistance under the new Program of Action for LDC must focus on digital transformation as a critical enabler to address the multidimensional economic vulnerabilities of LDCs and to support productive capacities. To reiterate our call for effective and results-oriented partnership under the new Program of Action for LDCs, we think LDC 5 should prioritize and deliver an implementing mechanism between LDCs and development partners and ESCAP in the following areas. First, the new Program of Action must ensure that graduation does not exacerbate economic challenges to LDC, but that it is a smooth transition to support graduated countries to achieve sustainable development. In this respect, I wish to call for a more detailed analysis of the consequences of graduation to prepare a smooth transition strategy and request ESCAP to provide Tuvalu with a technical and financial assistance to support the preparation of the strategy that provides tailored solutions to Tuvalu context and circumstances. 2, increase international assistance, both technical and financial, including ODA, to continue building the resilience of Tuvalu, social protection activities for all, and expand investment in resilient infrastructure. This includes a call for reduction in high transaction costs on remittances, often the most important resource and revenue to people in LDCs as Tuvalu. 3 is to devise a new generation of international support measures in the fields of trade, finance, and technology to arrive at a scaled up and coherent package that addresses the structural challenges of Tuvalu. This is especially important given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and to build resilience to future shocks. Finally, I wish to acknowledge and thank our LDC's development partners and international organizations for their steadfast support and commitment to the sustainable development of LDCs. LDC 5 will be instrumental in our partnership as we continue to strive for better livelihoods and the future for the people in LDCs amidst the global challenge of COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. I thank you.
Thank you for that statement, Your Excellencies. We will now go to statements by our development partners, and we will begin with Her Excellency Ms. Lotte Makon, State Secretary for Development Cooperation, Denmark, and this will be by virtual participation.
Thank you so much, Chair. Excellencies, dear colleagues, thank you for giving me the floor. I am indeed very pleased to attend today's discussion on the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action in the Asia-Pacific region. It is both important, it's timely, and it's a much needed debate. The least developed countries are amongst those that are hardest hit by the pandemic, which has been alluded to by the previous speakers most eloquently. COVID-19 is causing immediate health risks, rising unemployment, stagnating investment flows, and increasing poverty and overburdening health systems. On top of this, many of the LDCs are also severely impacted by climate change, amplifying existing vulnerabilities. In this time of great change and lots of challenges, it's time to reflect, which we have done in Denmark. And we have, with a broad parliamentary support, the government have launched a new strategy for development cooperation that is set to put action behind all the words. We know the challenges, now it's time to act. With the new strategy, we want to be at the forefront of the global fight against inequality, but with a special focus on sustainable development, that is on the green agenda and the challenges arising from climate change, not least in the LDCs. It is our mission to create hope and new opportunities for people living in fragile and conflict-affected situations, and especially, as I mentioned, to lead the fight against climate change and restore balance to the planet. This with a focus on LDCs and the SIDS. Denmark is proud to be one of only 5 countries still meeting the UN target for the world's richest countries to provide 0.7 of GNI in development aid, as recorded by the OECD DAC. At the same time, we are committed to provide our fair share of climate finance and enhance financing for adaptation. We will strengthen our partnership with the private sector and mobilize funding from a number of different sources to reach the goals. The SDGs and the Paris Agreement are not achievable through development aid alone. We need to gear and catalyze more funding, including through the private sector. We hope to continue to work closely with our country partners, with civil society and international actors, of course also the UN, to find the best solutions and help more people who need it the most. Denmark is committed, and I'm so sorry, Denmark is committed to sustainable development, and you can count on us as a partner the whole way through. Let us continue this important work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that statement. We will now go to a recorded video statement coming from His Excellency Sang-wook Ham, Deputy Minister of Multilateral and Global Affairs of the Republic of Korea.
I am pleased to join you in this important meeting to reaffirm our strong commitment to supporting the efforts of least developed countries in the Asia-Pacific region to reach the SDGs. Since the adoption of the Istanbul Program of Action a decade ago, Asia-Pacific LDCs have been making considerable progress in socio-economic development, with 9 out of 12 LDCs meeting the criteria for graduation. The Republic of Korea has also been increasing our development assistance to LDCs by more than fourfold during the past decade. However, it is disconcerting to witness how COVID-19 is threatening years of progress in achieving the SDGs, hitting the least developed countries the hardest. Efforts to accelerate the graduation of Asia-Pacific LDCs are required more than ever. In this context, I would like to highlight a few points. First, our top priority should be to end the COVID-19 crisis by supporting the pandemic response of LDCs, especially the equitable distribution of vaccines. Overcoming COVID-19 is a prerequisite for the development of all countries. For this reason, since last year, the Korean government has provided almost $100 million in health assistance to 125 countries to help with their pandemic response, of which about $18 million were provided to 42 LDCs. Also, President Moon Jae-in pledged to contribute an additional $200 million to the COVAX AMC. Secondly, strengthening partnerships between LDCs and a range of stakeholders, including member states, the private sector, international and regional organizations, and civil society is essential. Establishing an innovative and stable ecosystem and renewing the partnerships between different stakeholders can help LDCs mobilize additional development resources and enhance development effectiveness. We hope to have an in-depth discussion on this very topic at the Bhutan Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, which will be held from November 23rd to 24th in Seoul. Thirdly, we should strive to reflect the lessons learned and the development needs of the region in the outcome of the 5th UN Conference on the LDCs, the next program of action. This will be the key to strengthening partnerships between LDCs and development partners in the next decade. It should include experiences of graduated Asia-Pacific countries and address regional and global issues such as digitalization and climate change, taking into account their development context and needs. In closing, I would like to reaffirm the Korean government's commitment to supporting Asia-Pacific LDCs to build back better and accelerate their graduation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now go to statements by UN agencies, beginning with Ms. Pamela Cook-Hamilton, Executive Director, International Trade Center. This is in person.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all take this opportunity to congratulate my friend, my colleague, my countryman, His Excellency Courtney Rattray, on his appointment as Undersecretary General and High Representative for the UN OHRLS. Very good to see you again, Courtney. The Asia-Pacific region is now at a pivotal moment in its development. 10 years ago, 13 of 47 LDCs were from this region. Today, we can jointly celebrate the graduation of 3 countries, Maldives, Samoa, and just last December, Vanuatu, a country that accomplished this feat a mere 8 months after being hit by a Category 5 cyclone. Moreover, 10 Asia-Pacific LDCs have met the criteria for graduation. This is a critical achievement which embodies the clarion call at the heart of the 2030 agenda to leave no one behind. While we celebrate the wins, we're cognizant of the challenges which remain for LDCs as they battle socioeconomic devastations fueled by the pandemic, climate change, and conflicts. Just 2 weeks ago, Haiti, a stone's throw away from my home country, Jamaica, suffered a devastating 7.2 magnitude earthquake, which also was felt in Jamaica and many other islands across the Caribbean. A few days later, Tropical Storm Grace added to the destruction. While not in the Asia-Pacific region, this example of a Caribbean LDC reflects the real risks and challenges that exist. I urgently appeal to the international community to step up its efforts in the wake of such destruction. Only 1 month ago, I delivered remarks at the WTO high-level session to commemorate Afghanistan's 5th anniversary of WTO membership. Having worked closely to build the trade capacity with the Afghan government over several years, our hearts are deeply moved with concern over what has unfolded over the last 2 weeks. These 2 examples show us how easily progress in LDCs can be overturned. UNCTAD's analysis on LDC's trade flows in 2020 paint a picture of the challenges LDCs continue to encounter. While global exports declined by 7.7% in 2020, trade exports in LDCs declined by 10.3%. Our commitment as the ITC is to ensure that LDCs can leverage trade as a powerful driver of economic growth and sustainable development. Our thrust within the Asia-Pacific region has been centered around strengthening the export sector, building the local capacity of MSMEs to integrate into global value chains, and boosting their competitiveness. Your Excellency, Dr. Momen, as you know, ITC has been a long-standing partner in Bangladesh. More recently, with the kind support of the UK Department for International Development, we have been able to strengthen Bangladeshi women-owned businesses under our She Trades Commonwealth program. In countries such as Nepal, Laos PDR, Bhutan, and Cambodia, key sectors such as coffee, organic agriculture, and horticulture, processed woods, textile, and handicrafts continue to benefit from ITC's interventions. Through our work, we also equip their ministries of industry and commerce to formulate trade policies, negotiate trade agreements, and improve investment promotion, which will contribute to long-term resilience. As a trusted partner with governments in this region, we understand that there are concerns related to graduating, especially in an unfavorable global climate. We appreciate that the loss of some international support measures can be intimidating, which has guided our work in preparing LDCs for the graduation process. Allow me to share one example with you. Upon graduation, Laos PDR will no longer be eligible to export under the unilateral preferential tariff schemes that 23 markets around the globe have in place for LDCs. While this implies estimated trade losses of $108 million, our export potential methodology indicates that their export products affected by the tariff increase have an unrealized trade potential worth $52 million in the same group of markets and $1.2 billion in other markets. But collective support is needed to help them achieve this objective. Our work in this region repeatedly points to the need for specialized support to MSMEs throughout the graduation process. We need a strategic roadmap to help LDCs to double their share of global exports, a missed SDG target in 2020, but one that can be achieved in the future with concerted efforts. Private sector-led growth requires all hands on deck: governments, development partners, civil society, and international organizations. Public-private dialogue is key. I implore ministers to ensure the involvement and sensitization of the private sector in the transition process. A key feature of a successful transition strategy should be to ensure that some degree of preferential access is retained in key export markets through unilateral preference schemes, such as the GSP, or through bilateral or regional agreements. Likewise, capacity building of trade investment promotion agencies will be instrumental. These are but a few pivotal areas where ITC is well positioned and ready to collaborate for the region. Ladies and gentlemen, as the clock ticks closer to the convening of the LDC-5 conference, let us renew and deepen our collaborative efforts to overcome the challenges and help LDCs to capitalize on the opportunities which await them. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We will have another statement delivered in person. This is coming from Mr. Joshua Siripa, Managing Director for the Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, you will recall that one of the main achievements of the Istanbul Plan of Action was the establishment of the UN Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries, which is dedicated to strengthening the science, technology, and innovation capacity in the LDCs. Since its establishment and operationalization, the Technology Bank has demonstrated effectiveness in working with the LDCs and multi-stakeholder partners to place science, technology, and innovation priorities at the forefront of dialogue and action. The Technology Bank continues to support LDCs through technology needs assessments that provide analysis of the national STI environment and identifies the specific needs of the country that can be addressed with the use of technology. And in parallel, it identifies and prioritizes technologies relevant to address those needs. To date, we have 16 TNAs that are underway at different levels of completion. The plan is to, by the time of the LDC conference, LDC5 conference, to have completed at least 30 TNAs for presentation at the conference. Capacity development initiatives are also being undertaken to strengthen capacities of experts, policymakers, and institutions on STI, policy formulation and implementation. These initiatives are key towards meeting the targets of the IPOA and also to align with the STI support actions to increase agricultural production and productivity, support LDCs in their efforts to facilitate the transfer of relevant skills, knowledge, and technology under mutually agreed terms towards responding to the LDC's needs. Unfortunately, while the Technology Bank was gaining momentum and strength to support the LDCs, the COVID-19 pandemic triggered unprecedented shock, which disproportionately, as we've heard this morning, has impacted the LDCs most critically because of the already inherent vulnerabilities at multiple levels. It has also meant that resources have been reallocated to contain the COVID-19 towards the COVID-19 response. The pandemic, as we've also heard repeatedly, risks reversing the positive gains by LDCs and negatively impacting majority of the targets and indicators under the IPOA. From the perspective of the Technology Bank, the pandemic explicitly reinforced the relevance of its mandate by highlighting the urgency of continuously enhancing STI capacity in the LDCs to ensure that their recovery from the pandemic is sustainable, resilient, and leaves no one behind. The pandemic has also demonstrated that science, technology, and innovation are enablers and drivers for socioeconomic empowerment and productivity, from education, health, environment, to trade in the new digitalized world economy. Unfortunately, the LDCs have remained behind in the digitalized world due to limited financial resources allocated to STI. Their infrastructure, research and development capacity, institutional and regulatory capacities are also inadequate to withstand the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Innovative support measures have to be provided for the LDCs to strengthen their science, technology, innovation capacities. For example, in the LDCs, the ratio of R&D expenditure as a share of GDP was 0.6% or less between 2011 to 2017, compared with around 2% of developed countries much larger GDP. Those countries with R&D capabilities have fared better in responding to COVID-19, but highlighted the increasing levels of existing inequalities within and amongst countries. And the current debate around vaccine inequality is also a very good example of the challenges that LDCs face. It is our view, therefore, that the Technology Bank has an important role to play in the advancement of STI, as well as bridging the digital divide and contributing to COVID-19 response and recovery. We call on all LDCs to continue supporting the Technology Bank to mobilize resources towards strengthening its capacities. We also note that advances in STI are very instrumental for LDCs to graduate and maintain their graduated LDC status. Lastly, Chair, as LDCs prepare for UNLDC 5, an ambitious plan should not only focus on reversing the losses, but creating innovative approaches to a stronger recovery that is underpinned by science, technology, and innovation as one of the key pillars. It is our sense that the plan should create an enabling environment for LDCs to access, adapt, and harness the potential of existing and new technologies, as well as bridging the deep digital divide. Strengthening productive capacities for LDCs will be critical to respond to the new and existing challenges and building back better and sustainably towards meeting graduation targets. I would like to add also by taking this opportunity to announce that the Technology Bank will be reporting to the General Assembly in a few weeks' time on its first 3 years of activities, and we will appreciate all support of our partners in that discussion towards ensuring also that the next 3 years are also continuously productive and continue to provide transformative support to the LDCs. We are also in partnership with UNCTAD and ESCAP are hosting an event on Wednesday on the topic of harnessing science, technology, innovation in support to structural transformation and LDC graduation, and we invite everyone to participate in that event, which is scheduled for the 1st of September, day after tomorrow. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. We will now have a statement delivered virtually by Mr. Zhou Ziyong, Managing Director, Director of Program Partnership and Field Coordination, and Director, Department of Regional and Field Coordination, UNIO. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great honor that I'm representing the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, today at the Asia Pacific Regional Review Meeting on the implementation of the IPOA in preparation for the upcoming LDC 5 conference. Following the successful organization of the Africa and Haiti Regional Review Meeting in February, today's gathering gives us the opportunity to reflect on the progress made by countries in Asia and Pacific in the implementation of the IPOA. As per our mandate, UNIDO can specifically reflect on the role and the status of inclusive and sustainable industrial development, or ISID, which is also enshrined in the SDG line of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Although the effects of the pandemic have exposed the vulnerabilities of LDC's businesses and economies, including in Asia and the Pacific, they have also offered the opportunity to realize the much needed structural transformations to overcome those disruptions. For instance, diversified and stronger industrial sectors have never been more relevant in order to build back better, stronger, greener, especially for building effective health industries in LDCs. Fast recovery also implies for LDCs to rely on science, technology, innovation, and digitalization, as well as the opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution as engines for a new generation of investment agreements to advance the decade of actions on the SDGs. This has been also elaborated by many speakers before me. Excellencies, UNIDO has mainstreamed the IPOA following its adoption in 2011 through the development and implementation of our own operational strategy for LDCs, which is coming to an end this year. In alignment with the IPOA, UNIDO has conducted a comprehensive in-depth review of its past work in LDCs, and its findings will contribute to the formulation of the organization's next strategy for the LDCs in alignment with the forthcoming Doha Program of Action. Today, I'd like to share with you 4 main lessons which are emerging from UNIDO's LDC review exercise, as well as several independent project evaluations in Asia and the Pacific, and our statistical data. Firstly, trade and industrial development in Asian Pacific LDCs are rapidly advancing their economies and moving them closer towards the graduation pipeline. Asian economies particularly reveal relatively positive prospects towards reaching target 9.2 of the SDGs, which aims to double the share of industry in GDP in LDCs by 2030. Although this target may not be challenging to achieve because of the impact of the pandemic, Asian LDCs still have strong capabilities to recover faster and better. For instance, countries such as Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Cambodia have significantly accelerated their shares of manufacturing value added in GDP during the past decade. Secondly, as per UNIDO's comprehensive response framework to COVID-19, partnerships should be central to technical cooperation and policy advice at all stages of the pandemic when containing, responding, and recovering from the crisis. Multi-stakeholder approaches, in particular, have higher capacities to absorb larger investment and deliver impactful and resilient outcomes. For instance, UNIDO has been implementing its flagship initiative, the Program for Country Partnership, or PCP, in Cambodia. The PCP includes several cross-sector focal areas which are supported by key stakeholders such as international financial institutions, bilateral partners, multilateral funds, UN agencies, and private sector. This approach really gives us the opportunity to maximize the opportunities that are offered by different sources of funding to support the SID of LDCs. Certainly, technical cooperation should be accompanied by strong government policies. LDCs in Asia and the Pacific can reach the full potential of the public and private business sectors if the right policy frameworks are in place. This includes industrial development policies, entrepreneurship strategies, and plans of action for micro, small, medium enterprises. UNIDO stands ready to support the elaboration and implementation of such policies, and believes that the involvement of relevant national decision makers is a critical factor for stimulating inclusive policies for women, men, and youth. Furthermore, capacity development is generally an immediately necessary component in any type of industrial policy frameworks. Firstly, national initiatives are most successful when implemented in synergies with regional and global frameworks, such as SOSOS and triangle cooperation modalities. Those avenues for cooperation are not only able to increase the shares of resources, knowledge, and the solutions among peoples, countries of the source. There are also ways for transferring appropriate technologies in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, thus allowing LDCs to respond to challenges of poverty, climate change, and environmental degradation. Excellencies, through the Doha Program of Action, our joint effort will further support the structural economic transformation of LDCs in Asia and the Pacific, while making sure that no one is left behind. UNIDO is committed to further support LDCs in their inclusive and sustainable industrialization path, and hopes to see several countries graduating by 2030 as planned. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that statement. We will now have a statement again delivered virtually by Mr. Shi Dong, Director, Division for Least Developed Countries, Regional and National Development Sector, World Intellectual Property Organization.
Mr. Chairman, Honorable Ministers, Mr. Undersecretary General, High Representative Courtney Rattray, Madam Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP, Akmina Sansia Ali Jabana, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. At the outset, I would like to join previous speakers to extend our sincere thanks and high appreciation to the government of Bangladesh the UN OHR LLS, and the UN ESCAP for organizing the Asian Pacific Regional Review meeting. It is indeed a great honor for me to participate and speak at this meeting on behalf of the World Intellectual Property Organization. Mr. Chairman, our organization's long-standing partnership with the least developed countries has always been underpinned by the strong commitment for collaboration from both WIPO and the LDC member states. Under the leadership of WIPO's Director General, Mr. Darren Tang, our organization is strongly committed to intensify supports and assistance to the LDCs, thereby contributing to the implementation of the relevant targets of the SDGs in the LDCs, together with building an inclusive, balanced, and effective global IP ecosystem that serves the interest of all countries, including LDCs and their stakeholders. In this spirit, we attach great importance to promoting innovation and creativity in LDCs and to empowering them to utilize intellectual property as a tool for growth and development. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, WIPO has been actively contributing to the implementation of the Istanbul Program of Action for LDCs through various programs and activities under WIPO deliverables for LDCs for 2011-2020, a dedicated and distinct set of support activities for the benefits of the LDCs over the last decade, which was adopted by the Ministerial Declaration during the high-level forum on building a comprehensive framework for promoting development in least developed countries through innovation and creativity, which took place in 2011 in Istanbul, Turkey, on the occasion of the 4th UN Conference on LDCs. This practice has been unique within the UN system supports for LDCs. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity to present some of the key highlights of the concrete progress made in implementing the WIPO deliverables for the LDCs in Asia and the Pacific during the past decade, and to update on what WIPO aims to do to ensure that it brings more impacts for the sustainable development of LDCs. The summary reports on the implementation of WIPO deliverables in Asia and Pacific LDCs has been circulated as an official document of our meeting. First, WIPO assists LDCs in integrating intellectual property into their national development policies and strategies to strengthen their ability to generate economically valuable IP assets. Since 2010, 8 out of 12 LDCs in Asia and the Pacific have adopted IP policies and strategies at the national level, and 5 are in the process of implementing them. Second, during the period of 2010-2020, 305 senior officials and experts from Asian Pacific LDCs have benefited from the advanced international training programs on intellectual property rights for economic growth and development for LDCs, co-organized by WIPO and the Swedish government. In addition, since 2015, WIPO has been organizing regional partnership initiatives for innovation and technological capacity building in the LDCs in Asia and the Pacific, in collaboration with the UN ESCAP. Until now, 4 regional meetings for LDCs in Asia and the Pacific have been organized under this partnership initiative, with 64 senior officials and experts having taken part. In the same period, 20 students from Asia and Pacific LDCs have participated in joint master degree programs on IP for LDCs with financial supports from WIPO. Third, on facilitating access to technological and scientific knowledge, a total of 715 institutions in 10 LDCs in Asia and the Pacific have been trained in and use the Access to Research for Development and Innovation, ARDI program, which was launched in 2009. 11 Asian Pacific LDC have been participating in various activities under the similar Access to Specialized Patent Information, ASPI program. Between 2010 and 2020, Technology and Innovation Support Centers network were established by WIPO in 6 LDCs in the region. WIPO program on transfer of appropriate technology for LDCs as a need-based development cooperation project have benefited some LDCs in Asia and the Pacific in addressing specific development-related issues. Fourth, over the past decades, various capacity building activities were also organized by WIPO for 7 LDCs in Asia and the Pacific in branding and IP strategy, branding for businesses and communities, trademark protection, collective marks, branding for adding value, and branding for design for small and medium-sized enterprises. Last but not least, WIPO has also undertaken studies and provided legislative assistance and policy advice upon request to the number of Asian Pacific LDCs, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Myanmar, Nepal, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, on traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression. Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, despite some signs of progress in the past decade, there is still a strong need for a continued support for the effective use of IP for growth and development in the LDCs. IP can be a strategic tool to promote innovation, give a boost to SMEs, generates income and create jobs. Science, innovation and technology can offer effective and sustainable solution to multiple challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic to all countries, including LDCs. Therefore, capacity building for science, technology, innovation, and the use of IP for development in LDCs should be among the key areas of focus at our forthcoming 5th UN Conference on the LDCs. Our organization will be responsive and proactive to find creative means to continue its supports for its LDCs member states while focusing on sustainable impact, which is important to all of us and should benefit all stakeholders. We aim to provide more need-based and impact-oriented activities and projects to facilitate the LDCs using IP as a tool for growth and development. For instance, we will continue assisting LDCs in developing inclusive, balanced, and effective intellectual property ecosystem. This requires that we look at IP and innovation from the ecosystem perspective, going beyond just putting in place relevant IP legislation and regulations to bring together various elements that are critical for the successful use of innovation to drive economic growth and development. For example, by linking research with enterprises, building skills and capabilities in technology transfer and licensing, strengthening SME, MSMEs, etc. We will step up our efforts to assist LDCs in the commercialization of IP. To assist LDCs in using intellectual property effectively as a tool for growth and sustainable development, we aim to broaden the knowledge, awareness, and use of IP by a much larger set of stakeholders, especially youth and women, SME, MSMEs, research institutes, and communities. LDCs would require not only specialized IP expertise, but also need to develop IP and innovation-related practical skills and capabilities which will be needed for innovators, creators, startups, SMEs, MSMEs, and other stakeholders in the broader innovation ecosystem. In the run-up to the 5th UN Conference on the LDCs, WIPO will review the implementation of WIPO deliverables for the LDCs undertaken over the last decade and look forward to developing a new set of WIPO deliverables to bring more impacts for sustainable development of LDCs through the use of IP and innovation. Mr. Chairman, let me conclude by wishing you all the productive deliberation and very successful outcome of this regional review meeting. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Last but not least, Excellencies, dear colleagues, we have a request for the floor by His Excellency Bonak Posh, Secretary of State in the Ministry of Planning, Cambodia.
Program of action in preparation for the 5th United Nations Conference on LDCs. On behalf of the Royal Government of Cambodia, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the UN OHR LLS, ESCAP, and the Government of Bangladesh for organizing this important event. Excellencies, the year 2021 marks an important milestone for Cambodia for having met for the first time the criteria to graduate from LDC status at the 2021 Triennial Review of the Committee for Development Policy. For over 15 years, Cambodia had experienced an average growth of over 7% per annum, inclusively lifting millions of people out of poverty. Although it is important to recognize this progress, it is also worth noting that the 2021 review did not consider the impacts of the COVID-19. While the proportion of youth and adolescent population in Cambodia is among the highest in the region, representing a great human resource, potential for prosperity and sustainable development for all, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased their vulnerability and hampered their full and productive employment. In response, the Royal Government of Cambodia has undertaken a two-pronged approach to mitigate damages inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic via the acceleration of a nationwide inoculation program and emergency social assistance measures, including a cash transfer program. To date, nearly 10 million people living in Cambodia have been fully vaccinated, approaching the achievement of herd immunity. On the other hand, the social assistance measures have helped prevent millions of people from falling into deep poverty and a further contraction of the economy. Although Cambodia has demonstrated a continued commitment to graduate from LDC category to realize the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and to achieve a high-income country status by 2050, the long-term and unforeseeable impacts of the pandemic may hamper socio-economic development and therefore increasingly vulnerabilities and influencing the ability to meet the criteria for graduation at the second triennial review in 2024. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, despite the outbreak, the current situation, however, presents an opportunity for countries, including Cambodia, to engage in and further strengthen regional and international cooperation to build forward better. Cambodia has fully committed to the Istanbul Programme of Action. The Royal Government of Cambodia ensures IPOA principles are articulated in the national development priorities, including prioritizing public expenditures toward sectors related directly to the SDGs, including education, health, social protection, agriculture, and infrastructure, promoting trade policy and trade facilitation, as well as providing preferential treatment to developing countries for expanding greater openness of international trade and supporting stronger multilateralism and globalization, continuing to strengthen financial stability and diversification, as well as promoting the role of dynamism of the private sector to fulfill the financial need to achieve SDGs, ensuring continuity of ODA, especially financial assistance toward sustaining the momentum of the SDGs, and strengthening the ownership of building partnerships between all development actors. To conclude, on behalf of the Royal Government of Cambodia, I would like to reiterate our dedication and commitment to join a global effort fighting against this pandemic, to build forward better for all, and last but not least, to realize the 2030 agenda. I wish this regional review meeting produces fruitful outcomes for the 5th United Nations Conference on the least developed countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that statement. Excellencies, dear colleagues, we've come to the end of this session, and allow me to close as follows. Distinguished delegates and participants, I thank you for a substantive session. A summary of the session will be prepared by the Secretariat and made available on the conference website. I invite you to attend a side event titled Productive Capacities and Induced Structural Transformation on the Road to Graduation with Momentum, organized by Bangladesh, Canada, and UNCATD today from 15:30 to 16:45 virtually. The link is available at the conference website. There are some housekeeping announcements to be made. In accordance with UN-ORG COVID-19 protocol, all persons participating in person in a meeting at the Palais des Nations are kindly requested to continue to observe all COVID-19 safety measures. In addition, I would like to announce that all participants have a responsibility to report to the Secretariat if you are diagnosed with COVID-19 within 14 days of your last presence at the meeting, even if you have already left Switzerland. You have a responsibility to inform the Organizing Secretariat, Focal Point, or the UNOG Medical Service. An email with COVID Focal Points details will be sent to you shortly. Tomorrow's session, on session 2, entitled Supporting Our Climate Recovery from the Coronavirus Disease COVID-19 Pandemic and Building a Resilient Society Against Future Shocks, will be held from 9 hours at Tempus 1. All are invited to join. This meeting is adjourned.